who doesn't love Resident Evil? You got boulder punching, 7 minutes, and illogical and insane puzzles. I love Resident Evil, even if it has its flaws, and now we've got 30 games with more on the way. I really also love villains. I love seeing how they impact the game's story, and if they make their games better or worse. So I counted 46 villains in the Resident Evil franchise, and I decided to rank them all, because why not? The criteria for this video is non-existent, and I probably broke my own non-existent rules along the way, but it's late when I'm writing this, and I couldn't really care less. Anyways, let's get straight into the ranking. This one barely counts, but our first entry in the review is from Revelations 2. Pedro was a member of TerraSave, which was a charitable organization with the purpose of providing humanitarian aid in areas affected by biological terrorism. During an event, members of TerraSave are captured and brought to a remote island, where they are then experimented upon by the Overseer. In this experiment, the members of TerraSave were injected with the T-Phobos virus, which only begins to mutate a person once they reach a certain level of fear. This sounds straight out of, like, Saw 2.
I want to play a game.
Pedro is the first one of TerraSave to become a mutant, as he transforms and becomes the first boss of Revelations 2. Pedro is taken down by Barry Burton, and yeah, it's pretty obvious why he's in last. Didn't know him at all, and he was really annoying in the game. Like, this dude, super annoying, but immediately became a mutant, so really couldn't care less about him. And we have another villain from Revelations 2, this time much more sinister than Pedro. Nail at some point in the story became the leader of TerraSave and became obsessed with the thought of destroying bioweapons. He went so far as to betray 10 members of TerraSave to recover an Ouroboros virus sample from Dr. Alex Wesker, who we will see later in this video. He was planning on using it to help bring back the FBC, but instead, Wesker betrayed him and instead of giving him the sample, just straight up injected it into Neil. The virus quickly transformed Neil into a massive hulking monstrosity, which is eventually taken down by Moira Burton, with help from Claire Redfield. Neil was definitely more shady than Pedro, who was just a worker, and that's why he is only one spot higher than him. Finally, we get off Revelations 2. This game is straight up horrible. Hear me out here. I know a lot of you really like Nikolai, and I love a good Russian villain, but come on, you don't get to fight him, and the story is so ass for the remake that I couldn't care. Nikolai comes from Resident Evil 3, as he is a member of the UBCS. He is introduced as he shoots and kills one of his infected soldiers. A third party had bribed Nikolai before the Raccoon City mission, as he was also offered a reward for the death of Jill Valentine. Nikolai would betray Jill when Nemesis attacks the train leaving the city. He locks Jill in the train before heading to the Spencer Memorial Hospital, where he murdered Dr. Nathaniel Bard, who had the only samples of the T-virus vaccine. Nikolai was aware of the United States' plan to destroy Raccoon City on October 1st and try to escape before its destruction. It is unclear if he made it out of Raccoon City before its destruction, as there is no on-screen death for him. He did destroy the T-virus vaccine after promising it to Jill, but would be shot by Jill with the help of Carlos and left for dead before the destruction of Raccoon City. He was just a greedy mercenary that sold out his friends for money and eventually got probably nuked. He was cool and intimidating, but Jill doesn't even fight him in the game, so he goes at number 44. Sergey is from The Umbrella Chronicles, a Wii game, where he befriended Oswell E. Spencer and accepted an offer from him to become the Umbrella Corporation's secret parliamentary Colonel Guard. That was a lot. He was a strong ally to Spencer throughout the series, as he established a secret police force within the company to weed out traitors, giving information to the KGB. After being confronted by Albert Wesker in 2003, Sergey injected himself with a strain of the T-virus and transforms into a... well, I have no clue what that is.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Wesker takes him down rather easily. There is a rather funny moment where Sergey goes,
No, we are not done yet! Shut up, bitch.
Sergey was kinda cool, but really didn't do much in the actual series, and did most of his machinations from the shadows. This dude is annoying. He's like the Joker if he was born in like a posh neighborhood in Los Angeles. Irving was an American black market dealer of bioweapons, which got big after the Terra Gagriga panic. No clue what that is. Irving was a suspected dealer for some time before the BSAA confirmed his presence with the dealings. Irving sold bioweapons to terrorists around the world and helped Albert Wesker in his bioweapon research. Ricardo hid out in Kajuju, Africa, where he tested his Type 2 and 3 of his Plaga species. After Chris Redfield and Sheva Alomar tracked him down, Ricardo injected himself with a dominant Plaga species and transformed into something similar to Ramon, and was basically a giant alligator kraken, and he was like the tongue of it. Even though he was fully aware of the repercussions of his actions, Ricardo still transformed himself, but was eventually killed by Chris Redfield before revealing the location of the secret lab. Ricardo was alright. I mean, he just sounds like the Joker, and was just a rich dude who wanted more power. A pretty forgettable character in a pretty good game. The main antagonist in Resident Evil Revelations, Jack Norman, was a university lecturer and founder of the organization 2 Viltro. Norman would start a cult-like group with mostly college students with the belief that the Earth had become decadent and sinful. The group became highly prone to exorcism. It was because of this that he had caught the attention of the Bioterrorism Commissioner Morgan Lansdale. Norman was provided with the T-Abyss virus, but through all of this, Norman was always suspicious of Lansdale. Norman and other Veltro fighters became trapped on his Queen Ditto cruise ship, surviving in air pockets. Under Norman's instructions, the others infected themselves with the T-Abyss virus. After mistaking Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine for FBC officers, Norman injected himself with the Ultimate Abyss virus. He transformed into a gigantic tyrant look-alike where he could teleport. What the hell? How did he even lose? Norman would eventually get taken down by Chris and Jill before making peace and destroying the Veltro flag. Norman was an interesting villain and also overpowered as hell. It's insane that he even got defeated. I mean, that's why he's number 41. Didn't really care about him at all. And a very forgettable game. From Resident Evil Darkside Chronicles, Javier Hidalgo was the leader of a drug cartel called the Sacred Snakes. The United States sent Jack Krauser and Leon Kennedy to South America to find Javier. Javier had a daughter named Manuela and his wife Hilda. When Hilda became infected with an incurable disease, Javier tried to save her in 1991 with the T-virus. The virus worked but mutated Hilda. When his daughter showed the same symptoms 10 years later, Javier used the T-Veronica virus on her. He also kept her alive by kidnapping young girls from a local village and harvested their organs to then transplant to his daughter. God damn, that's fucked up. Because Javier got the T-virus from Umbrella, Javier never really trusted Umbrella after his wife mutated, but he did keep in close contact with BOW sellers like Albert Wesker. Javier would use his sacred snakes to study the virus and experiment on animals. After Hilda was defeated by Krauser and Leon, Javier fused with the plant T-virus to becoming the T-Veronica virus complex. However, although Javier thought he could control the virus, he starts losing his consciousness during the fight due to not having prepared like Alexia did in Code Veronica. Finally, after Javier begging Leon to kill him, Leon finishes off Javier by shooting him in the head. During the fight, however, Javier infects Krauser, which would lead him to be discharged from the United States Army, and eventually leads him down a dark path, but we'll see him later in the video. Javier was cool, but really didn't do much, although fusing with a plant is a first for the series, but still not an amazing villain at all. James Marcus was one of the 3 big founders of the Umbrella Corporation, and held the title of director of the company's executive training school. He played a major role in the finding and development of the T-virus, but his obsession with his research, specifically on leeches, would lead to him neglecting other responsibilities. Marcus was acutely interested in leeches and how they mixed with the T-virus. He was also making contact with a rival corporation called The Connections. Because of these actions, Marcus was attacked and murdered by Umbrella soldiers, along with Albert Wesker and a young man named William Birkin, who would replace Marcus as the lead developer of the viruses at Spencer's estate. But we will know more later in the video. James Marcus was one of the most influential people in taking the T-virus, or the Stairway to the Sunflower, from Africa. He also helped create the so-called progenitor virus. James Marcus's story doesn't end there, however, but we'll see what happened to him later in the video. I know there's a lot of coming up later, but it will all make sense in a bit. From the newest Requiem game, Chunk, or I guess the Chunks, are two giant mutations encountered by Grace Ashcroft and Leon Kennedy. The Chunks were actually two brothers before mutation, being Thomas K. Jackson and Timothy B. Jackson. Umbrella scientists like Victor Gideon removed parts of the brothers' brains that caused feelings of fulfillment. This made them immensely hungry as they could never stop eating and never got full no matter how much they devoured. The two are eventually killed by Grace Ashcroft and Leon Kennedy in their own parts of the gameplay. Chunk is pretty cool, but not in a lot of the game, and it's just more goofy than terrifying. He is kind of annoying, though, when you're trying to move around the care center. He kind of blocks the way for Grace a lot, so he can be pretty annoying. One of the main antagonists in Resident Evil 6, Carlo Radames was a bioterrorist and virologist who was responsible for the development and the creation of the C-Virus. Radames suffered permanent trauma after being used in experiments which created Neo Umbrella, which embezzled money to reach her goal in world destruction. While she was young, Carla got the attention of the Simmons Foundation, which was supposedly a charitable organization, but once she was recruited, she discovered it was a bioweapon research facility. She would help the head of the Simmons Foundation, Derek Simmons, get samples of the T. Veronica virus, from which she created the TO2 strain. Radames helped Simmons in their Project Ada, which used the T virus to try to replicate Ada Wong. Many people would die in these experiments before Simmons used Radames in the experiment and successfully turned her into an Ada Wong clone. Simmons would then train her on how to act and speak like Ada so as to effectively pass as her. In China, at another facility, Radames was found by Chris Redfield, and later the real Ada Wong, as Radames teased of a supposed T-virus missile, which would spread the T-virus around the globe and infect everybody. Radames would then transform into a pile of mud, or something like that, before fusing with the ship she was on, and then is left for dead. She was definitely an interesting and brainwashed character, so it's tough to say if she was truly evil, but she goes at number 37. From Resident Evil 2, Brian Irons was the chief of police at the Raccoon City Police Department and was a very corrupt cop. He was involved in corporate corruption and took bribes from the Umbrella Corporation, which kept the company out of any investigations. Umbrella would especially help fund his hunting trips, as when you go to his quarters in the Claire segment of RE2, you find tons and tons of animals, including exotic animals like tigers stuffed and mounted and framed throughout its office. In returns, Irons would keep silent about Umbrella's massive underground laboratory right underneath Raccoon City. During the Raccoon City T-virus spread, Irons sought refuge underground at the police department before taking Sherry Birkin at gunpoint from Claire Redfield and takes her away. After chasing Claire, Irons would get attacked by a mutated William Birkin as he gets a virus implanted in his stomach before getting chest bursted full-on alien style. It is also hinted that he might be a serial killer. Irons really depicted greed more than any other villain in the entire series, and it shows the state of the country in Resident Evil. It shows what these massive corporations can get away with. Or just real life. Edward Ashford, alongside James Marcus, was one of the three founders of the Umbrella Corporation. As a young man, Ashford was interested in eugenics, and this would lead him on a path to meeting and befriending billionaire Oswell E. Spencer, and the two would begin work on the progenitor virus, after they found the Stairway to the Sun flower in Africa. After discovering that the flower had the properties to transform living organisms, the trio of Spencer, Marcus, and Ashford were able to take some back to the United States before founding the Umbrella Corporation as a pharmaceutical company to cover up for their bioweapon research. The three split apart in the 1960s to found and research at their own laboratories, as Ashford would work with his son at their new facility in Antarctica. In 1968, Ashford would suddenly die after an incident at his laboratory where he got infected with the progenitor virus and died almost immediately. Rumors spread that Spencer was behind the death of Ashford, and while this is most likely true, we have no confirmation on who was responsible for Ashford's death. Edward isn't as impactful to the story like Spencer and Marcus, but his descendants would be the main antagonists for decades to come. From Resident Evil 0, the Proto-Tyrant was created in the Arklay Mountains laboratory operated by Umbrella. It was created in Umbrella's Tyrant project as part of their research to create an intelligent bioweapon for military use. However, the Proto-Tyrant was nowhere near a perfect design, as the scientists overdosed on the T-virus that defected the nervous system and lowered the intelligence of the host. It was deemed a failure due to the loss in intelligence and was sent to storage at Nest. It was released when the Queen Leech attacked in 1998. It would go on to fight Dr. Albert Wesker and Rebecca Chambers along with Billy Cohen. It was ultimately killed by Albert Wesker before getting permanently destroyed after the Umbrella training facility self-destructed. These early tyrants don't move me that much, besides one, but these guys do not stack up at all to another tyrant we will see much later in this video. So that's why, right after this one, from the OG Resident Evil, the Tyrant, or the T-002 model, was another part of Umbrella's quest to create the ultimate life form. Unlike its earlier counterpart, the Tyrant had intelligence at almost the same level as its human or pre-infected form. The Tyrant has an interesting and convoluted background that intermixes with the events of Resident Evil 0, with the doctors supposed to be monitoring the Tyrant were killed during the Queen Leech's escape. Cloned embryos of the Tyrant models were evacuated by Dr. Albert Wesker during a visit, but not the Tyrant itself. Wesker was then given orders to destroy the Tyrant so as to hide the evidence of Umbrella's operations. Instead, Wesker would release the Tyrant before being supposedly stabbed and killed by the BOW. The Tyrant has one more final fight with the STARS team on a helipad before finally being put down with a rocket launcher, which will become a trend with these villains. Kind of the same as the Proto-Tyrant, the Tyrant just doesn't have the backstory or just the cool factor to put them higher on the ranking. The Queen Leech is the tour de force of James Marcus's experiments with leeches. After James Marcus was assassinated, his body was dumped into the sewers along with his Queen Leech. The Queen Leech then consumed Marcus and merged itself with Marcus, gaining his memories and past experiences. Believing itself to be Marcus reborn, the Leech sought revenge for Marcus's death. It wasn't until 10 years later, or 1998, that the Queen Leech began its revenge. After the Leech caused attacks on Umbrella, it sparked the attention of both Albert Wesker and William Birkin, as they began their plans to destroy the Leech. They knew the Leech was residing within the Umbrella Training Academy, so they had to focus on that area to stop the Leech from spreading. The Leech fought both Billy Cohen and Rebecca Chambers in the training facility before shedding its image of Marcus and becoming a gigantic Leech monster, because of course. The Leech was finally put down by Billy Cohen before getting destroyed due to the self-destruct mode activated by Dr. Birkin. The Queen Leech is an interesting villain, and definitely one of the wildest ideas Capcom ever had for a villain. It was definitely out there, but for being honest, I love the idea. From Resident Evil Village come the daughters of Alcina Dimitrescu, being Bella, Cassandra, and Daniela. They are not exactly Alcina's children. They are adopted after undergoing Mother Miranda's experiments with the Cadeau virus. Not much is known about what happened to these three girls during the decades before the events of Resident Evil Village, but at some point, because of Mother Miranda's experiments, the girls were able to control and manipulate blowflies. When Ethan Winters arrives at Dimitrescu Castle, the daughters are sent to destroy him. Except, this is Ethan goddamn Winters, and when that man's daughter is in danger, there is absolutely nothing that stands in his way. Over the events of the castle segment, Ethan takes down every single one of Alcina's daughters, mainly using sunlight to destroy them. They aren't stalkers like their mother is in the game, and we don't know much about them, or just that they follow their mother's orders. They're pretty cool, but overall just aren't great villains. I'm a big fan of Resident Evil 7, and Marguerite might be the scariest villain in that game. In 2014, the Baker family found Mia, Winters, and Evelyn as they had been washed ashore in a shipwreck and took them in. They did not know, however, that Evelyn was in fact a biological weapon created by the Connections. Connections, however, were in cohorts with another Baker, who we'll see later. Evelyn had telepathic powers, and, desperate for a family of her own, slowly infected the Bakers in the house with her mold, or the Megamycete. Evelyn's infection would eventually take over Marguerite and control her. Due to this infection, Marguerite gained the properties to control mutant insects. Until 2017, when Ethan Winters would arrive at the Baker estate looking for Mia after a disturbing email she sent to him. Marguerite would later in the game begin her fight with Ethan, as she pushed him down a hole and sent her mutant bugs after him. During their encounter, Marguerite would mutate into a long-legged, almost Spider-Slender Man look-alike. They would eventually fight in the greenhouse before Ethan puts her down for good. She might be the scariest villain in the game, but there really isn't a good enough backstory for her to be any higher than where she is at right now. Donna Beneviento was one of the 4 lords of the area in Europe occupied by Mother Miranda. When she was young, she had the Cadeau experiment performed on her by Mother Miranda, and she was one of the lucky few to not become lichens. The experiments did not change her much physically or mentally, but she now had the powers to make people have vivid and horrific hallucinations. However, Miranda didn't believe her a suitable subject for her final goal of bringing her daughter back, as she saw Beneviento as too mentally unstable and underdeveloped to be suitable for the exchange. Beneviento was given a seat as one of the High Four Lords of the Land, and was given this seat from Mother Miranda. Beneviento would mostly communicate through her doll Angie, who she seemed to have a close connection with. After defeating Alcina Dimitrescu, Ethan Winters, who was in search of the part of his daughter's body, went to House Beneviento, but on the way inhaled the mold-infected mushrooms, which allowed Beneviento to show Ethan hallucinations of his dead wife. Ethan would recover another one of his daughter's flasks before the power cut, and he was met with easily the most disgusting and horrifying creature in Resident Evil history. A grotesque, four-legged, wailing baby-looking hunk of slime meat, which terrifies me every single time I play the game. After managing to dodge the baby, Ethan was met with a horde of dolls and had to play a game of hide-and-seek with Angie, which would lead to him stabbing the doll to death, which killed Beneviento, who was the doll herself. It was just an illusion. My goat Ethan Winters killed the last 5 villains, by the way. Goddamn, that man is goated. Beneviento is a cool villain, but she is barely in the story, as even though she technically is Angie, her actual body is only seen 2 times in the whole game. Also, her boss fight is literally just hide and seek, and it's really bums. I can understand hide and seek for a doll, which is meant to symbolize a child, as hide and seek is a children's game, but like, come on, that's all you can come up with? Oh, would you look at that, yet another character defeated by Ethan Winters. Just shows the lengths a dad will go to save his child. Moreau was another one of the 4 lords, and like practically everybody else in Mother Miranda's village, was experimented upon with a Cadeau parasite. However, like Beneviento, Moreau would change from the experiment, but what was different from the other 3 lords was that Moreau changed drastically in appearance. He became a weird fish-like dude, and was quickly named a failure by Mother Miranda, although he was still named as one of the high lords of the region. Moreau, like the other lords, actually thought of Mother Miranda as his actual mother, and this would lead him to desperately trying to prove his worth to Miranda. And along with the other lords, Moreau was given property of one of Baby Rose's flasks to safeguard from Ethan. After Ethan snuck into Moreau's land and took the flask, Moreau would attempt to stop Ethan by vomiting green mucus to stop him. However, Ethan would escape, and this would lead Moreau to mutating into a giant fish-like creature, where he would attempt to stop Ethan. After Ethan manages to drain the fishing village, he would have one last confrontation with Moreau, where he literally has the most health of any boss in Resident Evil history at a staggering 25,000 HP. But Ethan, as he always does, manages to kill Moreau and takes yet another flask. Moreau is definitely the most grotesque of the High Lords of Village, but he is a bit better than Beneviento on the grounds of the fact that he actually shows himself in the game and doesn't use a giant mutated baby and doll. Moreau was an interesting but not one of the best villains in the series. Lisa Trevor is the first instance in the Resident Evil franchise of a villain who is changed into something hideous against their will. Lisa Trevor was the daughter of George Trevor, an architect who designed the Spencer Mansion. To keep Trevor and his family silent, Oswald Spencer asked George to bring him and his family up to the mansion in the Arklay Mountains for a weekend. For some reason, George thought this was a fantastic idea, and sent Lisa and her mother ahead of him as he wrapped up some work. This holiday getaway would quickly become a permanent vacation for the Trevor family. After arriving, Lisa and her mother were detained by some of Spencer's guards and taken underground. There, Spencer had the 2 injected with the Type A and Type B strains of the progenitor virus. Over the next few days, the 2 were injected numerous times before Lisa's mother was deemed a failure due to her lack of reaction to the virus, and she was swiftly executed and sealed away in a stone coffin where no one could find Umbrella's secrets. However, Lisa's body reacted amazingly well to the virus and gained superhuman strength from the progenitor virus. However, Lisa's mental state would worsen and worsen as the days passed, as she longed for her mother. Over the next 28 years, Lisa was sent to the Arklay laboratory where her existence was kept a secret. Lisa was chained to a bed and was intravenously fed food and rolled around in a wheelchair. Lisa was, however, the first character in the series to be injected with a strain of the Nemesis parasite, but Lisa's immune system would kill the parasite, and Lisa gained some form of consciousness. During the events of the Arklay incident and the events of Resident Evil, Lisa Trevor mainly resided in a cabin outside the mansion. Lisa Trevor would eventually get defeated and fall into the chasm below the mansion. However, this wouldn't be the end, as in Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles, Albert Wesker would finally defeat and kill Lisa Trevor during the mansion's self-destruct sequence. We're seeing a pattern now. Lisa Trevor is definitely one of the saddest stories in Resident Evil, as she really was just a young girl who was searching for her parents. We'll get into that bastard Spencer later, who made her the way she was. We have to go back to this dogshit game. Alright, Alex Wesker is definitely an interesting character that doesn't get talked about almost at all when talking about Resident Evil villains, but in my opinion, she's not too bad. Wesker was part of, well, Project Wesker, the same experiments that created Albert Wesker. Alex Wesker was a very smart person even before the experiments, and was one of the reasons she was picked for the project. In the 1970s, Alex arrived at Sign Island, I think that's how you say it, an island that we will know more about in a sec. She created a gigantic pharmaceutical research institute on the island, that of course was just a cover-up for viral research. She was also named to the Umbrella Intelligence Division, being an acquaintance of Lord Spencer. In 1998, along with Albert Wesker, she was injected with the prototype virus as part of the next phase in the Project Wesker. Albert and Alex were the only two to survive the experiments. However, unlike Albert, Alex gained no superhuman powers from the procedure, although she still remained close to Lord Spencer. However, in 2000, Alex and close colleagues returned to Sign Island to continue their research, and eventually Alex would have her master plan of using the island's locals as guinea pigs for her experiments. Alex finally shut down the island and took the civilians as hostages, and began experimenting upon them. She would perform the project at the island to the T-Phobos project in 2006. During her research, Alex tried to find a way to transfer human consciousness between one person to another, to try to preserve her aging body. Outside of the rapidly evolving T-Phobos project, Wesker also created the Kodoku experiment, which aimed to create new bioweapons. So basically, what every villain tried to do in the series. Wesker looked for other options of helping with the research on the islands. She sought Neil Fisher, who we saw earlier in the video, and was the leader of TerraSave. In 2011, at a company party, Alex's soldiers abducted over a dozen of the TerraSave workers, where they were transported to the Sign Island and had that whole experiment done to them that we talked about earlier in the video, and one of these workers was Claire Redfield. Wesker seeked to get rid of all loose ends by infecting Neil Fisher with the Ouroboros virus, which turned him into a gigantic monster. Seeing everything as complete, Wesker took out a handgun and shot herself in the head, and I would never just cut to her doing that. Like, I would absolutely never, not in a million years, I would never, ever do that. However, in her final moments, Wesker felt the fear of death and becoming nothing. Her unconscious body would then mutate into a powerful and weird-looking creature looking somewhat similar to the girl in Requiem. Ugh. Alex would release the Ouroboros BOWs and would have one final confrontation with Claire Redfield at the end of Revelations 2, and it's finally put down by the old reliable itself, the rocket launcher, baby. Alex Wesker is definitely an interesting villain that has way more lore than I originally thought, but at the end of the day, she's not an amazing villain, with most of her story coming outside of the game.
Body. Gosh-a-rooney, you little bitch!
The son of an earlier entry on the list in Edward Ashford, Alexander helped his father study the progenitor virus. However, Alexander was never outstanding in his field of virology, and eventually became a researcher for the Umbrella Corporation, as everyone does. Alexander took DNA from Veronica Ashford in an attempt to bring back the Ashford's family reputation. Alexander combined the Veronica's DNA with a gene that increased intelligence. The result was twins, being Alexia and Alfred Ashford, who were both incredibly smart for their age. Alexia was a child prodigy and became senior researcher at Umbrella's Antarctic facility at just 10 years old. Alexander was fearful that the knowledge of the twins would ruin the family legacy, and so he hid all of their files and evidence in a secret chamber at the Antarctic facility. Alfred, however, would find the room and spend the next decade trying to get in. Eventually, after tricking Alexander into giving him the final piece to unlock the door, Alfred was horrified to see that he was just an unintentional mistake in Alexander's work. At that time, Alexia became obsessed with the T. Veronica virus, which was a strain of the T virus mixed with queen ant DNA, and she wished for it to be used on herself and released into the world. However, Alexander would create a BOW to stop Alexia from releasing the virus. Alfred, however, was still furious at Alexander and captured him before experimenting upon him. He used Alexander as a test subject for the T-Veronica virus, which eventually mutated Alexander into a hideous monster known as Nosferatu. For over a decade, Nosferatu was trapped in a secret chamber as the workers rode down hearing his screams of agony. Eventually, during the events of Code Veronica, he is met by Claire Redfield. Nosferatu would eventually break free and meet our heroes at the helipad. After a bit of battle, Claire was finally able to put Alexander out of his misery by exposing his heart and dealing the final blow. It's interesting to say if Alexander was truly a villain, but with all the stuff he experimented with and what he would eventually turn into, he definitely deserved to be on the list. It is ultimately sad that it became a hideous creature for so long, because he actually stopped his daughter from creating world chaos and didn't have any aspirations of taking over the world like so many other villains on the list. Definitely an interesting character, and deserved to be here on the list. Simmons was born into a very important but secret family, which were the leaders of the secret society, the Family. This group would work in the shadows of world governments to achieve their goals. Derek would eventually rise to power as the head of the family, which practically gave him limitless resources. In 1998, Simmons would meet with mercenary Ada Wong and would task her on dangerous missions, which she executed flawlessly. Simmons was also the mastermind behind the destruction of Raccoon City, which we originally thought was destroyed to stop the T-virus outbreak, and this also isn't the last time we'll see a differing reason why Raccoon City was destroyed. After this, Ada would stop working for Simmons, and this would lead Simmons down a path of cloning and experimentation. As we talked about in the Carla Radames segment, Simmons was infatuated with cloning Ada Wong, and after thousands of test subjects, he finally succeeded with Carla Radames. After Radames became Wong, Simmons would teach her how to act and talk like Ada so as to not raise suspicions. Sherry Birkin would fall under the wing of Derek Simmons and manipulated her into giving him information from inside the government. In 2012, Simmons would get told of the existence of Albert Wesker's son, Chris Mueller, and he believed that Mueller might have the same superhuman properties as his father. He also believed that Mueller might be the key to both enhancing the C-virus, which Simmons was working on, and also possibly a vaccine for it. However, Radames would betray Simmons when they captured Sherry Birkin and Jake Mueller. Radames would lie to Simmons and told him that the two had died in an explosion while transporting. But in truth, Radames had taken the two for her own to research the C-virus herself. About 6 months later, Simmons would take action against the US President, Adam Benford, and the reason why is because Benford planned to release the true reason on why Raccoon City was destroyed, and Simmons, fearing he might be exposed, used United States Secret Service agent Helena Harper to help him in taking down the president. Simmons had Helena's sister, Deborah Harper, kidnapped and used her as leverage for Helena to help him. When the president was at Ivy University, Helena would leave an opening for the president when Simmons released a fog version of the C-virus, which infected everyone that inhaled it, and the virus would infect and transform Benford. After the death of the president, the blame was shifted to Leon Kennedy, who had been implicated in virus weapons before. Simmons would get a call from the real Ada Wong, who told him that Carla had betrayed him and was bent on destroying the world order. Simmons would then head to China to deal with Carla and her betrayal. While at a facility, Simmons would be confronted by Leon Kennedy and Helena Harper. Simmons would order his soldiers to kill them before escaping on a passing train. However, before escaping, he was shot by a C-virus needle, which would eventually transform him while on the train. However, Leon and Helena had also gotten onto the train to try to finish Simmons off once and for all. Simmons from the infection would erupt into flames before transforming into a menagerie of creatures, including a quadruped creature, a giant centaur-looking monster, a giant Tyrannosaurus Rex look-alike, and everything in between. Finally, Simmons and Ada would have one final confrontation, and the two longtime rivals would plummet down, and Simmons would supposedly meet his end, getting destroyed in a fiery inferno, as Ada saved herself with her trusty grappling gun. However, he's still not dead yet, and confronts Leon and Helena in a giant fly form until they get a rocket launcher and destroy Simmons, as he falls down and gets impaled on a monolith, and his blood creates the Umbrella logo. That's a lot of blood in one dude. Goddamn, Simmons had a lot of background, and even so, he isn't my favorite villain, but he easily has one of the coolest boss fights in the entire series. I mean, come on, he becomes a dinosaur. That's dope as hell. Simmons is cool, but really can't go any higher, especially because he's in RE6, easily the worst game in the mainland series, although I still love playing it. Hunk is a huge fan favorite among the Resident Evil community, and deservedly so, as he has one of the coolest designs in the entire series, along with him being in a bunch of mercenary modes, making him a fan favorite. No one even knows Hunk's true name, and that also adds to the greatness of this character. In Mid-1998, Hunk was commander of the Alpha Team and was tasked with breaking into Umbrella's nest to steal the G-Virus from William Birkin. After confronting Birkin in his lab, Hunk ordered Birkin to come with them, but Birkin wouldn't allow them to leave with his master creation, so he pulled out a handgun before being shot by one of Hunk's soldiers. Hunk collected the case with the G-Virus samples and left the presumably dead Birkin in his lab. While en route to the extraction point, Hunk and his team were attacked by a mutated Birkin who had managed to inject himself with the G-Virus to keep himself alive and had become a disgusting, hideous creature. Birkin would pursue Alpha Team through the sewers before the contents of the case spilled out, infecting the water and contaminated Raccoon City's water supply. So I guess Hunk is behind the Raccoon City incident. Rough. Hunk and Goblin 6 were the only survivors of Birkin's attack, but it wouldn't be long before Goblin 6 would meet her demise, leaving Hunk, also known as the Grim Reaper, the lone member of Alpha Team. Hunk would fight through hordes of enemies before getting a radio call from Goblin 6 down in the sewers, but Hunk, who was unwilling to go all the way back, delivers an immensely cold line.
This is war. Survival is your responsibility.
Hunk would reach the extraction point and get picked up by Nighthawk. Hunk might have also made an appearance in the newest Resident Evil Requiem, where Leon fights a mercenary who is commander and has a similar uniform to Hunk. Leon would eventually take him down with a hatchet, but it's still not even confirmed if it is Hunk, and I do hope it's not, as that would be such a bad end for a beloved character in the community as the Grim Reaper. He is one of the most beloved characters in the franchise, and I do hope we see him in more games in the future, and we'll probably see him in the Code Veronica remake, which comes out pretty soon. Mendez was a Catholic priest in Valdelobos, which was a rural mountainous region in Spain, and was chief of the village. Mendez fell under the influence of terrorist and cult leader Osmond Sadler, who would convert the people of Mendez's village to the cult of Los Illuminados. For compensation, Mendez was injected with a dominant species plaga, which allowed him to keep control of his body, as well as being able to mutate when needed. He was then ordered to expose the villagers to Las Plagas, which turned them into mindless followers of Los Illuminados. In 2004, Sadler was able to abduct the United States President's daughter, Ashley Graham, and planned to use her to expose the world to Las Plagas. However, Luis Serra, who was working on the plaga at the bioweapons research facility on an offshore island, stole the dominant plaga egg that was supposed to be injected into Ashley Graham. The villagers, however, rounded up Luis and tied him up in the basement of one of the villagers' houses. This is where Leon Kennedy meets Luis after being sent by the president to save Ashley, but Mendez was there and knocked Leon out before injecting him with the plaga parasite. Leon would also run into Mendez at the village chief's house after retrieving the iron insignia key. Mendez choked Leon out before seeing in his eyes that the plaga egg had accepted Leon, so Mendez let him go. After saving Ashley from the church and escaping the village, Leon was met by Mendez, who attempted to take Ashley, but Leon was able to hold him off, and the two escaped over a bridge, which promptly collapsed. However, when entering the house on the other side, Leon would be attacked by Mendez in the two's final fight. Leon would shoot an explosive barrel at the feet of Mendez, and we get to see Mendez's true form, a giant scorpion dude thing with, no internal organs. I love the design, though. Leon is able to incapacitate Mendez by shooting at his exposed eyeball before Mendez mutated into his final form, but finally Leon is able to put down Mendez for good before Mendez yells, His body was then incinerated in the burning building. Mendez was a pretty good villain, and it's nice seeing a villain that carries out his own work and confronts the main character even before the end of the game. Mendez is cool, and I love his design, but can't really go any higher. Lucas was born to Jack and Marguerite Baker sometime around 1990 and was the first of two of their children, the other being Zoe. However, unlike Zoe, Lucas was a bad egg and always a very interesting child. However, in 2014, he and Zoe still lived with their parents, and also Jack would bring home two girls in Mia and Evelyn. Evelyn, however, was not entirely what she was made out to be, as she had the power to control a mold-like substance which could take over a person's mind. Evelyn would take over everybody else in the household, including Lucas, until he was met by a representative from the Connections, a company developing bioweapons, and Evelyn was one of them. Lucas would be given a vaccine for the mold. In exchange, Lucas would spy and report on his family's doings while they were controlled by the mold. Lucas would also make elaborate traps for victims that, even when solved, would kill them, so it's very clear that he was a psychopath. Lucas would eventually betray the Connections and locked all the researchers with the mold, which would lead to their deaths. Lucas would first meet Ethan Winters during the dinner scene.
Dumb Some bitch wasn't no good if it hit him.
Come on, Jack, he's got to get better with his manners. After breaking out and investigating the house, he found Mia, but before he could free her, Lucas would appear from behind and kidnap her again. As Ethan progressed further and further, Lucas would continue to mock and make fun of Ethan throughout the whole thing. Lucas would try to kill Ethan with a stick of dynamite in a birthday cake, only for it to blow up and make an escape route for Ethan to leave through. However, Lucas was being observed by Blue Umbrella, with Chris Redfield leading them, and spied Lucas heading into the salt mines and went after him. Lucas, at an undisclosed time, had kidnapped 3 of Chris's soldiers and tied them up, and as Chris attempted to save them, Lucas would attach a bomb onto Chris's arm, which was only stopped from blowing up because it's Chris Redfield, and he just spread a little liquid nitrogen on there and disarmed the bomb. Lucas, continuing to try to kill Chris, explodes the mines, but Chris is able to escape before it collapses. Lucas would then ambush Chris with a knife, but Chris managed to shoot him in the head, and this led Lucas to mutate into a gigantic, grotesque creature that, after a long fight, Chris finally gets the upper hand on and delivers one of the coldest lines in the Resident Evil franchise.
Game over.
I absolutely love Zeno, even though he is an obvious Wesker copy. Wesker was a badass, and Zeno is also a badass. It is unknown how Zeno got his powers, but it must have been similar to the VACT virus, which was injected into Wesker and made him superhuman. It is unclear what company was behind the creation of Zeno. It's unclear if it was a failed Umbrella experiment, or if some other company got their hands on Umbrella's secrets. Zeno also has Raccoon City Syndrome, which means he must have been in or around Raccoon City during the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3. However, this infection has not weakened his powers in the slightest, even though it looks like his infection is similar to Leon's in the infection stage. He is implied in the game, however, to be a clone of Wesker, and this could work as Wesker was around Raccoon City during the outbreak, and if Zeno is made from the same DNA as Wesker, he might have had Wesker's infection passed down to him, and the reason Wesker didn't show signs is because it seems that this outbreak has occurred very recently. He is also one of the leaders of The Connections, a mysterious company that seems to pull the strings behind the US government. We first hear of Zeno when Gideon talks to him on the phone in the underground lab, but it's not until after Emily's supposed death and Leon and Grace separate that Grace first meets Zeno. He has one of the slickest fits in the entire series, and I just love the design of Zeno. Maybe this is just me, but we all remember Wesker wearing practically all leather in RE5, but Zeno has a leather jacket draped across his back, almost signifying that at the end of the day, this guy is not Wesker and doesn't have the abilities or smarts to ever be Albert Wesker. I feel like the leather jacket signifies that Zeno, even as hard as he might try, will never be Wesker. Zeno, Grace, and Victor Gideon then get on a helicopter, and even though in the early game we saw Gideon as the big bad, it's clear that he follows the orders of Zeno, and that Zeno is more powerful than Gideon. Zeno and Grace head for the Raccoon City Police Department, while Zeno orders Victor to stop and eliminate Leon. However, it's Leon Kennedy, and he defeats Victor and meets Grace and Zeno at the RPD, where Zeno tells Grace that she is just a clone. This will be shown to be incorrect, as Zeno is getting his information from Victor, and Victor does not know what the hell he's doing. Zeno would show off his Wesker abilities by dodging every one of Leon's shots, before picking up Grace and setting a tyrant on Leon, and telling him to
Have fun.
Later in the game, Leon finds Zeno and Grace in the middle of a giant nest facility where they found Elpis, or at least the box that contained Elpis. The box needs a password to open, and if you get it wrong, the virus is destroyed. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention Elpis this whole time. Elpis is what Zeno and Gideon are searching for. Supposedly it has the property to control people, although neither Zeno or Victor truly know what Elpis is. All they know is that it is an extremely valuable weapon that could easily change the world's order. Once again, Zeno easily dodges Leon's shots and somehow manages to keep his jacket on before pulling out his gigantic modified revolver with a long barrel that uses rifle ammo, and it is called the Redemption. God damn, I'm forgetting. But earlier in the game, while in Raccoon City, Leon found some dead BSAA agents, and using one of their cameras, sees Zeno absolutely destroy the entire squad. I mean, damn, he's blowing them apart. I still stand by my statement, by the way, of Zeno being a badass. Grace then threatens to kill herself so that Elpis can never be opened, and during that time when Zeno thinks, Leon gets free and he and Grace escape on a conveyor thing. However, they eventually head back to the main area, meeting Zeno again. There are two endings here. If you, as Grace, decide to destroy Elpis, Zeno will kill Leon. But if you release Elpis, Zeno will inject himself with the virus, as he thinks it'll make him stronger. However, Grace found out that Elpis wasn't a weapon at all, but a vaccine that cures all virus-based illnesses. So Zeno loses all his powers, but also loses his Raccoon City illness. It's ironic that as Zeno gets furious that he lost his powers, he actually saved himself by curing his illness. Gideon walks up again, and Zeno can just leave with Elpis and try to take over the world by getting rid of virus-based weapons. But he can't. His ego is too big, and he can't let Victor into the spotlight, so he argues, and eventually Victor says,
You are nothing but an imitation.
and Zeno is very butthurt about this, but he doesn't have much time to mope before Victor Zeno was badass, and I don't think this is the end of his story, as in the end credits, some soldiers pick up what might possibly be Zeno's head to get Wesker's DNA, but it's unclear what they picked up. Zeno is amazing and one of my favorite characters in Requiem, and one of my personal favorite villains in the series. Just the way he acts, the way he dresses, the way he carries himself is just so badass. He easily deserves this spot. Before we start this segment, I'm putting it out there, I'm not counting Darkside Chronicles for this one, because I think it ruins the story. Alfred was the supposed son of Alexander Ashford, who we mentioned earlier, and the sister to Alexia Ashford. Alfred and Alexia were created as a part of Alexander's gene project, where he put an extremely intelligent gene and spliced it with Veronica Ashford DNA to get the twins. However, he didn't tell them this and kept it a secret. Even though they both had the same intelligence gene administered to them, it was clear that Alexia was the smarter of the two, and by the time she was 10, would become senior researcher at Umbrella's Antarctic facility. At the facility, Alexia would combine Queen and DNA and the progenitor virus to create the T. Veronica virus. In 1983, the two discovered the truth behind their creation, and they would subsequently capture and administer the T. Veronica to their father Alexander, and he would become the hideous creature known as Nosferatu. Alexia would find a way to control the Veronica virus, but it would need 15 years of incubation to successfully merge. With no other viable option, Alexia had Alfred close her in the incubation chamber to combine with the virus. So at the age of just 12, Alfred had no family left and would graduate at an English university before joining Umbrella. Alfred was given inherited governorship of Rockfort Island, where he would drive out the local Spanish population to create concentration camps for enemies of Umbrella. Yeah, like full-on Nazi Germany. Umbrella was fucked up. Alfred's mind would slowly deteriorate and develop a split personality, one that was himself Alfred and the other his sister, Alexia. In 1998, Umbrella HQ became aware of a HCF spy ring from inside Rockfort Island. The HCF was a group of highly trained soldiers under the direction of Albert Wesker. In December 1998, HCF would infiltrate Rockfort Island and detonate an explosive in its lab, leading to the Epsilon strain of the T-virus escaping as an airborne pathogen. The virus would begin, well, infecting people, because of course. However, Alfred would escape and arm himself with a sniper rifle. He incorrectly assumed that Claire Redfield was with the HCF and had led the rest to his island. Alfred would leave his estate before setting a self-destruct sequence because it's typical Resident Evil. Alfred would release a T-078 Tyrant, which was given to him by Umbrella, barring an attack from the HCF, and he set the Tyrant to kill any remaining survivors. Alfred would flee Rockfort in his private jet as he headed for the Antarctic base. However, Alfred would find the base overrun with zombies. He would meet his end after being shot by Steve Burnside and falling down a huge pit. But that wasn't the end for Alfred, as he would crawl to his sister's cryogenic chamber and, with his last breath, releasing her. Alexia, now fully integrated with the T. Veronica virus, would take Alfred in her arms in a loving way as he drew his last breaths. It is sweet that Alexia still loves Alfred, even after him living over a decade without her. It's a lot better than in Darkside Chronicles, where Alexia just kills him for being late. Straight bullshit. Alfred is one of the most interesting villains in the series, and the only one to have a split personality. A really cool villain, but can't go any higher, because his voice is also kind of annoying.
You don't fool me! I am Alfred Ashford!
Say my name.
Heisenberg.
You're goddamn right.
No, not that Heisenberg, but I do really like Heisenberg as a villain. Heisenberg was another one of the four lords of the area in Eastern Europe occupied by Mother Miranda, and had the sigil of a horse. Heisenberg was subjected to the Cadobe experiment, and because of this, he would gain the power to control metal. Although the other lords revered and always begged for Miranda's approval, Heisenberg always held a grudge against her due to her own selfish desires to bring her daughter back, as he thought that Miranda only thought of the lords as her trinkets or failed experiments. He wasn't wrong. Because of this, Heisenberg would create a rebellion against Miranda, as he created a giant army of cyborgs and lichens. Heisenberg would build a massive factory and facility which he rarely left. He would first meet the protagonist of RE Village, Ethan Winters, at Castle Dimitrescu, where he subdues him with all his metal powers. He would then drag Ethan all the way to a meeting area where the four lords and Miranda were meeting. It is shown in this meeting that Heisenberg and Dimitrescu have a grudge as the two argue about who should take Ethan. Eventually, Miranda would entrust Ethan to Heisenberg, where he then set Ethan on a giant runaway with lichens chasing him. However, it's Ethan goddamn Winters, and he evades giant contraptions and evil crack Santa before escaping. Almost a day later, after Ethan had defeated Dimitrescu, Beneviento, and Moreau, Heisenberg would contact him through a television screen, which would lead Ethan to the final flask of rose and to lead Ethan to his factory. Heisenberg would meet Ethan in his factory and told him that Miranda had been using Ethan to kill the other lords. Heisenberg proposed that the two work together to bring down Miranda once and for all. However, Ethan would decline, and this would lead Heisenberg to... But of course, it's my goat Ethan Winters, and he manages to escape the helicopter dude. Heisenberg, furious that Ethan managed to escape, mutated into a gigantic slug-like piece of metal. During the final fight, Heisenberg's factory would be destroyed in an explosion planted by Chris Redfield, which infuriated Heisenberg even more. And of course, Ethan would manage to destroy Heisenberg as he exploded.
This can't be the end for me! I must kill her!
Some people don't like him because he's both a knockoff Magneto and has the name Heisenberg, but I really like him as a villain, and I think he's pretty humorous, the funniest of the lords easily. And it's nice that he doesn't just suck up to Miranda the whole game.
Out of the way, ugly! I want to see! He's awake!
Spencer, shut the fuck up!
Spencer is the final of the big three founders of Umbrella and all of the events that started this mad franchise. Spencer was born into a very prestigious family and later would become friends with eccentric billionaires Edward Ashford and James Marcus. In the 1950s, while on a solo hiking trip in the mountains of Europe, Spencer became lost due to poor conditions. However, he was saved by a mysterious woman named Miranda. Miranda, who was a biologist, took Spencer under her wing and taught him what she knew about the megamycete, or the mold. Spencer was fascinated by the mold's ability to transform and mutate life forms, an obsession that would lead him down a path of virology and illegal creation of bioweapons. Spencer wished to create a race of superhumans and to basically be a god to them, and once he discovered the mold didn't have the necessary properties to achieve this, he left, but would frequently keep in touch with Miranda. When he returned, Spencer only thought to improve the human race, and his visions only grew during the Cold War, where he realized the human race was destined to fall. With the help of Ashford and Marcus, Spencer would continue his research, but soon he would hear of an almost magical flower in West Africa, one that had the power to change an organism. Marcus would travel with his protege, Brandon Bailey, to Africa, and by 1967, the two would return with a flower named the Stairway to the Sun, that carried the properties of what would eventually be known as the progenitor virus back to the United States. Spencer, Ashford, and Marcus would create the Umbrella Corporation, which was a legitimate pharmaceutical company, but had illegal bioweapon research facilities. Spencer would use the symbol of the four houses which Mother Miranda resided over, a symbol that represents an umbrella. Spencer would hire architect George Trevor to construct a mansion for him in the Arklay Mountains, just outside of Raccoon City. Spencer tasked Trevor with making a home that made no practical sense, with locked doors and pits and insane elaborate puzzles, as well as an underground laboratory, which Spencer would use for his own research. Because of this, Spencer would invite the Trevors to stay the weekend once the mansion was completed, and, as we touched on in the Lisa Trevor segment, the family would never leave. George Trevor's daughter and wife would be used in experiments with the Type A and B viruses, so it's pretty damn clear that Spencer is not the greatest guy in the world. In the 1960s, Umbrella would begin abducting children to use in an experiment they would dub Project Wesker. This experiment was for Spencer to potentially create his master plan of a race of superhumans. One of these kids was named Albert, who we will know very well soon. Albert was a genius who had a doctorate in virology at the age of 17, and Spencer ordered him and scientist William Birkin to steal James Marcus's data to learn what Marcus had learned. In the 1970s, Spencer would order the creation of a gigantic underground facility, both the Ark and Nest. In the 80s, Spencer became worried about James Marcus's research with leeches and promptly had him gunned down and disposed of with the help of Wesker and Birkin, as Birkin became the head researcher at Umbrella. After the Raccoon City incident, Spencer ordered the creation of the Tyrants, including Mr. X and Nemesis. After the destruction of Raccoon City, Spencer and Umbrella would go to Congress, where the members would vote to cut off Umbrella from operating in the United States. However, using bribes and fake witnesses, Umbrella was able to push all of the blame onto the United States government. Spencer would also order the creation of a secret underground facility in Russia, where their research could be done without U.S. interference. Before his death, Spencer was shown to be possibly regretting what he had done in life, and ordered the creation of Elpis, a vaccine that would render all virus-based weapons useless. This would become a mystery on what Elpis was and lead to the events of Resident Evil Requiem. By 2006, Spencer was nearing his death and waited for the inevitable appearance of Albert Wesker. Later that year, after disposing of Spencer's guards, Wesker met Spencer in the latter's private office. Spencer explained to Albert exactly what the Wesker Project was. After this, Wesker would punch straight through Spencer's chest, killing him. Not too sad. Spencer was definitely an interesting villain that started everything in the Resident Evil franchise. His legacy will live on throughout the entirety of the series, and it is all because some dude got lost in Europe. I decided to split the original and remake versions of Mr. X, and it's very clear that the old Mr. X is worse than its remake, but he's still a good villain. The T-00 was sent into Raccoon City during the outbreak, with Mr. X's job being to kill any survivors seeking shelter at the Raccoon City Police Department. However, unlike its remake counterpart, the original Mr. X only showed up in scripted scenarios throughout the game. Leon first meets Mr. X on the west side of the RPD, where he has to escape him. By the way, the original Mr. X is slow as hell, like he's an absolute snail. He also doesn't have the bowler hat, leaving his head just bald. He kinda just follows Leon and Claire around and eventually follows them down into Nest to search for them. He is burned severely while chasing Leon or Claire, and loses his trench coat, exposing his vulnerable heart. Umbrella had put a trench coat and dressed Mr. X up to try to blend him in with the general population, and while many people would say that he would be easy to spot, would you really call the cops on someone like that? The Tyrants also have very exposed hearts, which is another reason why Mr. X wears the trench coat. And the original Mr. X is killed the same way by Leon and Claire, with the big bad killer, the rocket launcher. There isn't much on this original Mr. X. I mean, he's a good villain. He just doesn't have as nearly as much lore as the other Mr. X, which will be near the top of my list. Wink, wink. The girl, or Marie, was a clone created by Victor Gideon to try to recreate Grace Ashcroft and her genetic makeup. Prior to her mutation, the girl looked very similar to Emily, another clone, or even Grace, but she didn't have the memories that Victor needed to try to release Elpis. She would be injected with a strain of the T-virus that drastically changed her appearance into a gigantic, long-limbed, and extremely tall feral monster. Her skin appeared to be almost ragged or torn up, and her hair had grown long and messy. Her face became heavily mutated, as well as with bulging eyes, and her teeth had become rotten and always exposed. The girl is unstable and stalks her victims. She also cannot stand sunlight and relies on crawling overhead in the roof to move around. If she touches light, we see that it burns her, and if exposed for too long, will kill her. She also resides under the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center in a facility that is always dark, where she can easily move around. She first appears at the beginning of Resident Evil Requiem when Grace escapes her bindings and testings done by Gideon. She goes into the nurse's office or some office area where a corpse falls out of the door, jump scaring Grace, and is promptly eaten by the girl. Grace manages to escape her and get into the light before being saved by Leon Kennedy, who shoots the creature with his magnum, which seemed to have killed her. But it wouldn't be a Resident Evil villain if we didn't have a fake-out death, as somehow the girl survived. Later, after retrieving the star pendant to get out of the facility, Emily is grabbed through the wall and brought underground. So Grace has to go after her, and I'm going to be serious right now. I both absolutely love and hate this segment of the game. First of all, I'm a little bitch when it comes to creepy things in dark environments. Still, the scariest thing I've ever seen in a game is the baby in Resident Evil Village. That thing scares the shit out of me. I do like the atmosphere of the underground area, but goddamn, I cannot do without sucking my thumb and whimpering like a little kid. Grace is able to complete an elaborate puzzle of moving the power generators around before saving Emily from her cell she's locked in. It's sad to see that there are piles of dolls in the girl's cell, meaning that to some extent there was part of Marie trapped inside of the girl's mutated mind. We saw a doll in an empty cell adjacent to Emily's earlier in the game, meaning that the girl lived alongside Emily. Grace and Emily try to escape in the elevator before the elevator slams down on the girl and slices off one of her hands as she plummets down. But no, this is not the end of the girl just yet, as the girl and Grace have one more confrontation in the hangar where Grace turns on the power and burns the girl to death. Yikes, Grace. I mean, just saved Emily, even though she was a monster, but not well. The girl was a fantastic stalker, and I'm glad we got a true stalker in the game. I mean, Dimitrescu is sort of a stalker, but only for like 3 minutes. I do love the story and the design of the girl. It just scares the shit out of me. Another one where I'm using the original and the remake separately because I do really like the Nemesis remake. I have a lot of problems with the RA3 remake, like a lot. I still think it's an alright game. Actually, you know what? Scratch that. I played it again, like, since I recorded this the first time. It's horrible. I played like 2 and 3 back, and there was such a stark difference. It was bad. Although it is nowhere near as good as its predecessor, it's still an alright game, even if it's short as hell. Nemesis is one of the best parts of the entire game, though. The design is awesome, and man, he just looks so cool. Nemesis then becomes the local Kool-Aid man.
Alright, let me grab my...
Nemesis wasn't the same project as Mr. X, but Nemesis was a tyrant like Mr. X, but fused with the Nemesis parasite, which made him much stronger as the parasite controlled the tyrant. Nemesis was sent to kill all remaining STARS members, including Jill, because they were the survivors of the Spencer Mansion incident. This also makes Nemesis mutter to himself. So yeah, Nemesis busts through Jill's wall in a very interesting outfit, which was meant to both protect him, but also to control Nemesis's mutation. Nemesis chases Jill throughout her apartment before Jill manages to escape. Jill is unable to escape on a helicopter, leaving in the city, but it is shot down by Nemesis with a goddamn rocket launcher. Nemesis really turned the tables on them. You know, normally it's the heroes killing the villains with a rocket launcher in Resident Evil, but Nemesis is just built different, I guess. Jill then becomes the average United States driver and crashes straight into Nemesis, and they fall off a cliff. Except, Nemesis is perfectly fine from being dropped like 20 feet, but he gets shot with a grenade launcher, and he gets blown up again. However, once again, Nemesis is fine and chases Jill as she tries to get the subway moving. A thing people didn't like about the remake is that Nemesis isn't a stalker like he was in the original. He only shows up in scripted scenarios, and if you're just looking at the game perspective, it's fine, but in comparison to the original, it's heavily lacking. Although I still really like Nemesis in the remake, it would have been nice to have a stalker. Nemesis also has giant tentacles that he uses to infect nearby zombies to make them become these weird, like, scuba diver creatures. Nemesis chases Jill in a very rickety building before we get the first Nemesis boss fight. This one is pretty easy. You just have to shoot his tank on his back until it explodes, and you just have to dodge his flamethrower. After you do enough damage, Nemesis will just collapse, and Jill somehow survives a jump off a 10-story building. Except he's nowhere near dead, as he shows up 4 seconds later with a rocket launcher again that he just shoots at Jill for a while. Jill, with the help of Carlos, barely evades Nemesis as they try to escape to the subway, but oh no, Carlos has a job to do. And probably for the better, as this persistent-ass guy just destroys the goddamn train before we get the best line in the entire game.
Get off my train, shitbird!
Nemesis, now covered in fire from the explosion, jumps into a nearby river and appears to not know how to swim, except he's perfectly fine and jumps out of the water and is now a gigantic mutated beast. This is where we get the clock tower fight, and as Jill, we just gotta subdue Nemesis. Nemesis also appears to have lost quite a bit of intelligence from mutating, as he runs around the buildings in circles. Eventually, it seems that Jill finally put down Nemesis. No, he gets up again and injects Jill with some yummy Ebola virus, and she gets incredibly sick. I think Nemesis must have been built in a facility in Texas because that dude did not take his measles vaccine. It's not until much later when Jill and Tyrell attempt to catch Nikolai when Nemesis reappears and immediately kills Tyrell, because of course, and Jill has to escape Nemesis because this game is just repetitive dog shit. and after a really intensive quick time event of Jill spamming forward for probably the 12th time because this game is repetitive bullshit, seems to kill Nemesis. Then after a confrontation with Nikolai, Jill gets dropped into a pit with Nemesis for the third boss fight. In this boss fight, you just run around as Jill and electrocute Nemesis when he climbs into some electric tankers, I guess. This game sucks, man. Finally, Jill, for the umpteenth time, seems to kill Nemesis as he literally gets covered in some toxic acid, because of course. Except, you would be an absolute dumbass if you thought that was the end, because a now gigantic and very goopy Nemesis fights Jill again, but this time, Jill has an electric railgun. Because of course. And finally, Jill puts down Nemesis for good by shoving a giant long stick down Nemesis' throat before having it explode. Finally, he's dead. That was at least 40 fake-out deaths from Nemesis. No wonder this game absolutely sucks. Nemesis was easily the most repetitive villain in the series, but I mean, come on, it's Nemesis. He's gotta be near the top. Could have been much better, though. Krauser is another one of the few Resident Evil villains to appear in multiple games. Krauser first appeared in Resident Evil Darkside Chronicles, where he and Leon Kennedy were tasked with stopping the drug lord Javier Hidalgo. Hidalgo, however, had bioweapons through a purchase and would eventually mutate with a gigantic T. Veronica plant. While traveling through Javier's mansion, Krauser began to agree with Javier's ideology of becoming stronger to survive. During the final fight, Krauser would be injured by the bioweapon, and he was discharged from the US Army. Now, here's where the story gets convoluted, because Krauser's allegiances change in the original Resident Evil 4 and the remake. Much of the same events take place in both games, and it's just who Krauser takes orders from that changes. In the original, Krauser works alongside Ada Wong to recover the Las Plagas Amber for Albert Wesker. In the remake, Krauser seeks out Osmond Sadler, seeking revenge on the United States and Leon Kennedy. See, during Operation Javier, Krauser became jealous of Leon, and now perfectly he executed every order that was given to him, whereas Krauser got permanently injured and discharged. In the original, it is Krauser who leads the kidnapping of the US President's daughter, Ashley Graham, which led to Leon Kennedy being secretly sent to Spain to retrieve Ashley. At some point before the events of RE4, Krauser was given a dominant Plaga egg by Osmond Sadler. We'll see later what Krauser used this egg for. Leon first encounters Krauser in the mines below Ramon's castle, where he kills the biologist Luis Serra, and he and Leon begin a knife fight. Krauser taught Leon that in close quarters, always use a knife. Krauser also took Ashley away before Leon's confrontation with Ramon. After defeating Ramon and getting to the main island, Leon and Krauser have a larger altercation in a large ruins area, with them engaging in knife and gunfights. Krauser would then monologue to Leon about why he changed. It all started back during Operation Javier, where Krauser had a revelation that the most important thing in this entire world was
Pure, unadulterated power.
Krauser would then show what he did with the egg as he injected it into himself before the events of RE4, as he mutated his arms into gigantic, almost sword-like appendages. Along with this, Krauser would enhance his speed and agility as he chases after Leon. Finally, after a pretty long fight, Leon would defeat Krauser. Dying on the ground, Krauser would tell Leon to kill him, which he does by stabbing him in the heart, with Krauser's last words being,
I dreamed well. Leon.
However, this isn't where Krauser's story truly ends, as in separate ways, the RE4 DLC, Wesker gets his hands on Krauser's virus-riddled body, which sets up the events of Resident Evil 5. Krauser wasn't in the story a lot, but boy, every single scene he's in is automatically amazing. Also, both voice actors for Krauser are spectacular and really bring the arrogant aspect of Krauser to life. Absolutely love Krauser, easily one of my favorite villains. Alexia Ashford was the twin of Alfred Ashford, and they were created by their father, Alexander Ashford, during his Project Veronica experiment. This project would enhance Alexia's intelligence, and by the time she was 10, would become Umbrella's senior researcher at their Antarctic facility. However, just 2 years later, the two would discover the truth behind their creation, and become infuriated at their father for not telling them. This would lead to the two capturing Alexander and injecting him with a strain of the T-virus that Alexia created by splicing the progenitor virus and Queen Ant DNA to create the T. Veronica virus. This would mutate Alexander into a gigantic bioweapon called Nosferatu that was kept locked away. Alexia would fix her mistakes in the virus and planned to fully put herself in cryosleep for 15 years to merge and control a virus. She would task Alfred with putting her in the chamber and protecting her while she was vulnerable. She would awaken 15 years later to find her brother dying after being shot by Steve Burnside. She would take him in her arms and watch over him lovingly as a sister until his death. Alexia now had full control over the T. Veronica virus and plotted how to take over the world as its queen. She captured Steve Burnside and Claire Redfield as she wanted revenge for the death of her brother. Alexia would inject Steve with a similar virus that she injected into her father, and it would mutate and transform Steve into a mutated BOW. She would later confront Albert Wesker, who demanded to get the T. Veronica virus from Alexia. Alexia would deny Wesker, and the two would begin a fight, and Wesker somehow does this. Alexia would transform as she shredded her human skin in favor of a gray one that she could manipulate fire with. Wesker would quickly back down from the fight and retreat, but almost immediately Alexia gets defeated by Chris. Why? Because plot armor, that's why. After being shot by Chris in the control room, Alexia would mutate into a cocoon-like creature that looked similar to an anthill. After spawning weird creatures like dragonfly ant things, Alexia would finally be put down by the linear launcher. Once again, like Krauser, there isn't much lore on Alexia because she's been asleep for 15 years. She's an interesting villain, and that is one of the only villains in the series to actually master one of the viruses and be able to control their transformation. I'm not exactly sure how Alexia would have been able to be the world's queen like the Queen Ant, but it might have had something to do with releasing the T. Veronica virus to the world, like another villain later on. Another cool villain, but if they didn't have much lore behind them, then it can't really go a lot higher, but still love Alexia. Although appearing to be a little girl on the outside, Evelyn was actually a bioweapon created by the Connections, a very mysterious company that in recent games has always had its fingers in the Resident Evil pie. She was created using the mold, or megamycete, supplied by Mother Miranda, along with a sample of DNA from Miranda's long-dead daughter, Eva. There is even a picture of Miranda holding the baby Evelyn that Chris finds in Resident Evil Village while searching Miranda's personal lab. Evelyn was artificially aged to look 10 years old to suit her infiltration purposes. However, her creation would be a huge controversy, as organizations realized that her mind control powers, aided by the megamycete, would render weapons almost obsolete. In 2014, Connections would make the decision to hide Evelyn away, so as to not reveal the more intricate ways of her creation, or for companies to steal her genetic code. Connections agents Alan Droney and Mia Winters would escort Evelyn on a cargo ship which was headed for Central America. However, just days into the journey, the ship would be caught in a violent hurricane. This would cause Evelyn to go unstable and attack her transporters as she infected Alan and would begin vomiting large amounts of mold, which would infect the crew of the ship. It was at this time when Evelyn would begin calling Mia her mother, as she showed her interests in being in a family. Their boat would be demolished and the two would be thrown into the ocean, but not before Evelyn was able to infect and control Mia using the mold. The two would wash ashore in Louisiana, where they were found by local family man Jack Baker. Jack would take the two back to his ranch, where he hoped to nurse them back to health. However, over time, Evelyn would infect the family one by one to try to make them into her family. Evelyn and the infected Bakers would remain in Louisiana for the next 3 years, with Evelyn keeping control over the Bakers, except for Lucas, who had done a deal with the Connections to get a serum to be unaffected by the mold, but in return, Lucas would feed information to the Connections about Evelyn's powers. Lucas would continue to fake being under Evelyn's control, and Evelyn would never grow suspicious about Lucas, remaining confident that she could control everyone. However, in 2016, Evelyn would begin rapidly aging due to not taking her medications, and she would quickly take the appearance of an 80-year-old woman in a wheelchair, although she still controlled the Bakers. In 2017, Evelyn would manipulate Mia Winters into contacting her husband Ethan into coming to Louisiana to save his wife. Ethan would be captured by Jack and would first meet Evelyn at the dinner table, even though she still had the appearance of an old woman. Evelyn would make Ethan hallucinate during his attempt to escape and randomly appears in different areas during the game. After defeating the Bakers, Evelyn would manage to kidnap Ethan in the ship that brought Mia and Evelyn to Louisiana. Mia would begin to search for her husband and would eventually gain her memories back and save Ethan from his mold prison. Ethan would reach a Connections lab in the salt mines near the Baker estate and create a toxin which would kill Evelyn once and for all. Ethan was able to fight off Evelyn's telekinetic powers and inject her with a necrotoxin. Evelyn's powers would diminish and she would have a short final boss fight with Ethan before crumbling away and finally ending this insane character. However, Evelyn isn't dead yet, or she is dead, but she's Undead? Man, I don't know. After having his heart literally snatched, not figuratively, by Mother Miranda in RE8, Ethan would enter heaven, maybe, or some stage after death, where he would see Evelyn. Evelyn would tell Ethan that he was always dead, even during RE7, as he was killed by Jack, and the mold was the only thing keeping Ethan alive. Evelyn was a cool and definitely different villain from practically every other one in the series, with the main villain being a child after all. I really like Evelyn, as she's another villain that could be said as a broken or just lost one. She just wants a family, and maybe it's not a good idea to kidnap and mind wipe people into believing they're your family and control them, but hey, what do I know? Evelyn was definitely an awesome villain, but just didn't have enough to get into the top 10. Finally, we reached the top 10. It's been quite a long video, but don't click off quite yet, as in my opinion, the 10 villains remaining are some of the best in all of game history. So hopefully your favorite villain is still left, and we're going to kick it off with the man-child, Ramon Salazar. Salazar is overall the same in the original and remake, but he does have slight alterations to his design. In the original, Salazar is more of a baby-faced lord, looking very young, just dressed up in a fancy costume. However, in the remake of RE4, Salazar has the build of a child, but looks like a grotesque old man with leprosy. I actually like the newer design of Salazar more because I like the more grotesque aspect to it, and him looking older in a child's body just looks weird. Salazar is in a line of lords based in rural Spain, with the Salazars residing in a giant castle which ruled over a nearby village. Ramon suffered from a deadly illness as a child, and his mother was forced to let in members of the Los Illuminados cult as a last-ditch resort to save her son. The cultists would save Ramon, and this would lead Ramon down a path with Los Illuminados, and its leader, Osmond Sadler. Ramon would be an orphan early in his life, and inherited the castle at a very young age. Ramon was a messed up child, however, as in his youth, Ramon would overhear one of his maids calling him Pulgarcito, I think that's how you say it, which means little thumb, and he would go insane, making the maid kneel before pouring vitriol on her head, literally melting her skin off. For centuries before the events of RE4, the Salazar family had always kept a dark secret, being Las Plagas, a virus they discovered in amber underneath the castle. The early lords vowed to never release the virus, but that would change with Ramon, who had been severely manipulated by Los Illuminados and Osmond Sadler. Sadler would eventually manipulate Ramon into giving him the ability to excavate the virus. To show his appreciation, Sadler would gift Ramon with a dominant Plaga egg, as well as 2 giant bodyguards, or verdugos, which were extremely deadly, especially when they take their cloak off. Ramon was also given the job of protecting the Queen Plaga, which had appeared in the castle and could create new Plaga constantly. We reach the events of Resident Evil 4, as Ramon first meets Leon and Ashley in the throne room, where he asks Leon to hand over the girl.
No thanks, bro.
Ramon would call to Leon over his speakers constantly throughout the game, and Ramon specifically is a very big fan of theater, as he loves to talk about what part in the play Leon and Ashley have. He meets Leon next in the throne room, where he orders Leon to be dropped down into the mines below the castle. He would also send one of his Verdugo bodyguards to dispose of Leon, although it's Leon S. Kennedy, and he disposes of it by dunking it in liquid nitrogen. So after that Mark Rober project, Ramon would meet up with Jack Krauser and hand over the captured Ashley to the Special Ops member, as Ramon prepared to face down Leon. However, just 2 seconds into his speech, Leon becomes the average citizen in Detroit and blasts the man-child. Salazar, however, would mutate as he merged with the Queen Plaga into a gigantic weird squid-like alligator, and is easily one of the hardest bosses in the series. I just hate how absolutely fast he is, and also, he has an instant kill move, which is just spectacular, of course. However, apparently Ramon is deathly allergic to eggs, and if you throw 2 golden eggs into his smug face, he dies. This is also, to my knowledge, the first villain in the series to have the tiny mutated body in the mouth of a gigantic creature. Ricardo Irving and Moreau have the same look. Ramon is definitely a fun and interesting villain, and it just feels nice to be able to kill a pompous, spoiled brat. Ramon definitely deserves 10, and ladies and gentlemen, it only gets better from here. Lady D is easily one of the most interesting villains in the entire Resident Evil franchise. Lady D was another one of Mother Miranda's experiments with the Cadeau parasite, and was actually the most successful attempt of Miranda's experiments. However, due to a blood condition Lady D had before the parasite, the Cadeau actually transformed her into a 9-foot-tall vampire, because the experiment also made her need human blood and flesh to survive. So, not compatible with Miranda's needs. She could also extend her nails into claws, which she used to, well, stab people. She was given the title of Lord and resided in Dimitrescu's castle, where she would begin a wine business, which we can also see in Gideon's Room in Requiem. Dimitrescu was no fan of any of the other lords, but openly hated Heisenberg, as she thought of him as a little brother, which infuriated the meth dealer. Oh wait, wrong franchise. Lady D would kill her staff pretty frequently to drink their blood to stay alive, and this would cause her to need new workers constantly. Unlike Heisenberg and Moreau, she didn't have an interest in the Cadeau or creating experiments of her own, instead relying on her daughters given to her by Miranda. Bella, Daniela, and Cassandra weren't actually Lady D's daughters, but Cadeau experiments by Miranda that merged with killer blowflies. However, Lady D did have a secret weakness that no one else knew about. This seemingly harmless knife actually had the power to kill Dimitrescu because of some weird toxins and things infused in it. Now we reach the events of Resident Evil Village, where Dimitrescu is the first lord that Ethan Winters has to fight as he arrives at the castle looking for his daughter. Ethan is almost immediately abducted by the daughters and is brought before Dimitrescu, who...
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
Oh my goodness. Lady D leaves with her daughters though, and Ethan is able to escape his bondages. Ethan then becomes a special op and mows down countless Lycans and takes down all 3 of Lady D's daughters, and she is obviously pissed off. Also, Lady D for some reason allows the Duke to set up shop in her castle, and allows Ethan to rest there. Also, Lady D becomes a stalker enemy in the final part of Ethan's escape, and she can be scary to run into when you're leaving a room. Ethan collects the masks of feelings and escapes the castle and stumbles across a suspicious dagger before being attacked from behind by Lady D. Ethan manages to stab Dimitrescu, and this causes her to mutate into a gigantic dragon thing with a huge mouth. Lady D's body merged with the top of the dragon, and this is what Ethan uses to his advantage by blasting her countless times over and over. Finally, Lady D is put down, and the two plummet through her castle before crashing at the exit, and she crumbles away. Another really good villain, which I gotta stop saying because we're just getting lower and lower in the ranking, so it's obvious they're good. Lady D is super interesting villain, and her setting easily adds to her brilliance, as the castle is just amazing. I just absolutely love Resident Evil Village, and she might be its magnum opus. Just a bit higher than Dimitrescu is Jack Baker, who is easily one of the best stalker enemies in the series. Jack was the one who found Evelyn and Mia, and would bring them back to his house instead of, bring them to a doctor. The effect of Evelyn's mold worked almost instantaneously on Jack, and he would pass on the infection to the rest of his family. The mold grew so much it started looking like the average college dorm room. Jack seemed specifically close to Evelyn, as he would obsess over her when she wasn't around. Evelyn would force the Bakers into abducting and killing travelers, for some reason. In 2017, the television show Sewer Gators picked the Baker's house as their next location. One of the producers, Peter, disappeared in the middle of the production, and if it's just me, I'm leaving the place. Rest in peace, Peter, but there is no way in hell I am doing that. The other producer and the cameraman would be taken by Jack and killed, because of course. Now we start the events of Resident Evil 7, when Evelyn manipulated Mia into contacting her husband Ethan into coming to Louisiana under the false pretense of Mia wanting help. Except this is Ethan Winters, and ain't nobody staying safe when Ethan's family is in danger. After fighting off an infected Mia, Ethan would get a traditional American welcome.
Welcome to the family, son.
Ethan would awaken at the dinner table, where Jack showed his disgust for people who throw food.
Good if it hit him.
And also showed his hatred for people who don't eat food when offered. After escaping, Ethan would roam around the house in search of an escape before encountering Jack, and this is where Jack shows his true brilliance as a character. As in other Resident Evil games, stalkers like Mr. X and the girl and Lady Dimitrescu are all slower than the player, making it not that difficult to escape. Except Jack must be on some crack cocaine because he books it after Ethan, walking incredibly fast and bashing him with a shovel. After just dodging Freddy Fazbear, Ethan would escape down to the garage, where he meets a local policeman who for some reason is very unwilling to help Ethan in his pleas for help, but Jack shuts him up. After watching a literal hate crime take place, Ethan would find some car keys and decide to be the average University of Georgia football player. Jack then grabs Ethan's gun and shows him something really special.
Do I have your attention, boy? You're about to see something wonderful.
After doing what every Boeing whistleblower does after hating on them, Jack seems dead, but like every RE villain, is obviously not. Ethan fights Jack again in an arena with chainsaws and a pair of giant scissors. Ethan would of course come out victorious by making the top half of Jack's body explode. Jack would then mutate into a gigantic slug with tentacles and fight Ethan one last time, and in easily one of the hardest boss fights in the series, Ethan puts down Jack for good. He then appears in the DLC, but I'm broken didn't get it, but apparently he gets finally killed by his brother Joe. Jack was a well-deserved addition for the Resident Evil franchise, and it was the first time since the original Nemesis that a stalker was faster than the player. Jack is easily one of the best villains in the entire series, the Freddy Fazbear of Resident Evil. Miranda was born in a mountainous region in Eastern Europe, and where she lived her early life and even as a kid. In 1919, the Spanish flu would wreck her local village, and most of the residents, including Miranda's daughter, would die. A heartbroken Miranda would wander into a nearby cave system to seek death, but found the reverse, finding the Megamycete. After touching it, Miranda gained the memories and knowledge of hundreds, if not thousands, of villagers. Miranda would hatch an insane plan to somehow bring her daughter back using the Megamycete to restore her daughter's memories into a viable host. Miranda would heal some sick and wounded villagers and pronounced herself as the Black God. The villagers would quickly join her faith and would revere her as a savior. Miranda would create makeshift laboratories to conduct experiments on the Megamycete. She would eventually create her masterpiece in the Cadeau parasite. This parasite was kind of like the T-virus in that it has a different effect on different people, although it just mainly turned people into zombies. Miranda would attempt to use the Cadeau parasite to bring her daughter back, as she experimented upon hundreds of villagers by infecting them with the Cadeau, most of them turning into lichens. However, a few were receptive to the parasite, including Alcina Dimitrescu, Carl Heisenberg, Donna Beneviento, and Salvatore Moreau. The parasite would change all four, with Dimitrescu becoming much taller and the ability to mutate into a giant dragon thing. Carl Heisenberg could control metal, Donna Beneviento could control dolls and secrete powerful hallucinogens, and Salvatore Moreau could create giant piles of mucus and transform into a gigantic fish. One of those definitely got the short end of the stick.
What the fuck is wrong with you?
However, none of those were suitable for Eva's return, although Miranda would still name them the Four Lords of the Region. In the 50s, Miranda would find a young English hiker who was lost on an expedition. The young man was one Oswell E. Spencer, and Miranda would take him under her wing to help her conduct experiments. However, Spencer never agreed with Miranda's ideas and would eventually leave her, but not before taking her ideas and the symbol of the four houses, which looks suspiciously like an umbrella. Much later on, the Connections would contact Miranda to try to team up. They would ask for a sample of the Megamycete and an embryonic clone of Eva. However, this would go awry and cause the events of Resident Evil 7. Miranda would learn of the existence of Rosemary Winters, the daughter of Mia and Ethan, and believed her to be the viable host for Eva's return. She would abduct Mia and transform her into her using the Megamycete and replace Mia with herself. This also spawned the conspiracy of if Ethan and Miranda ever slept together. One night before sitting down for a nice supper, Chris Redfield and his team, the Wolves, would infiltrate the property and become the average Chicago citizens. Miranda, Ethan, and Rose would be transported in a truck, but on the way Miranda would break free and take Rose, which leads to the events of Resident Evil Village. Ethan searches through the local villages, fighting off Crystal Meth Santa Claus and a whole bunch of lichens, before learning of a certain ceremony that Miranda would hold in which she would transfer Eva into Rose. An old hag, which was just Miranda in disguise, would lure Ethan to Dimitrescu's castle by telling him that Rose was there. Ethan would fall for the bait, but eventually defeat Dimitrescu and retrieve a flask which contained Rosemary's head. Ethan would fight and defeat the other three lords and retrieve the flasks needed to bring Rosemary back, but would get his heart ripped out by Miranda. Miranda went to the ceremony site and summoned a giant tree-like canopy of Megamycete to ensure protection, and would raise Eva from the mold. At that moment, a revived Ethan Winters would try to interfere, and Miranda realized it wasn't Eva she had brought back, but Rose. Ethan and Miranda would have one final fight in the Megamycete, and Ethan would prevail, finally killing Miranda. Ethan would then sacrifice himself after being mortally wounded and blow up the Megamycete, finally ending everything Miranda had built. Another really good villain with another sad backstory that once again was defeated by my glorious king.
Fuck you, you crazy bitch!
Not much is known about the background of Osmond Sadler or the Sadler family, other than the fact that they were banished for being worshippers of the religion Los Illuminados. Sadler would get his chance when Lord Ramon Salazar became grievously ill, and out of desperation, Ramon's mother would bring Sadler in to help Ramon. Sadler would heal Ramon, and this would cause the young lord to grow interested in Los Illuminados. It is also likely that Sadler was the one who disposed of Ramon's parents, so Ramon inherited his huge castle, and Sadler would be able to manipulate him. Sadler would eventually convert Ramon to Los Illuminados, but that wasn't enough, as Sadler would visit local villages to try to sway them. He would eventually bring village chief Torres Mendez to the cause, and Mendez would help infect the villagers with the Las Plagas parasite, which was found in amber underneath the Salazar castle and was vowed to never be released by Ramon's ancestors. But Ramon was eventually manipulated into releasing it, much to the pleasure of Sadler. Because of this, Sadler would gift Ramon with a dominant Plaga egg and 2 Verdugo bodyguards. Ramon was also charged with guarding the Queen Plaga, although not much is known about that. Sadler would entice former Special Ops member Jack Krauser into joining his cause and helping Sadler with his plans of world domination. Krauser would kidnap the US president's daughter, Ashley Graham, with the goal of spreading Las Plagas throughout the government. Sadler also had the ability to control a person if they were infected with Las Plagas, and had the ability to mutate on his own. Ashley would be injected with Las Plagas, and would be kept at the village church until she was mutated. Because of his help, Sadler would gift Krauser with a dominant Plaga, which Krauser almost immediately used to boost his own abilities. This would lead to the events of Resident Evil 4, where Leon Kennedy would be sent to Spain to save the president's daughter. Leon would make his way through the village, fighting off the mutated villagers. Leon would save Ashley from the church, but not before being infected by Mendez. He would eventually have a showdown with the village chief, in which Mendez mutated into a weird scorpion-looking thing with no ribcage. Leon would take down Mendez before heading to Ramon's castle. Leon would fight off a lot of Ramon's guards before having a showdown with Ramon in the Queen Plaga room, where Ramon would merge with the Queen, but it wasn't enough to stop Leon. Ashley would also be abducted and brought by Krauser to Sadler's Island, which was heavily fortified. Leon would save Ashley and get rid of their infections, but not before having a final showdown with Krauser. Leon would take down yet another one of Sadler's henchmen, and this would eventually mean that Sadler was the only person standing in the way of Leon and Ashley's escape. However, Sadler was not done yet with his plans of world takeover, and would have a final confrontation with Leon. With some help from Ada Wong, Leon would fight a mutated Sadler with eyes all over its crab-like body. Sadler would eventually mutate into his final form with a gigantic eyeball in the middle of this random mess of tentacles, and Leon would finally put down this Ralph Fiennes wannabe by shooting him in the face with the crowd-favorite rocket launcher, and then gives him the holy body. Leon and Ashley would escape the self-destructing island by jet ski. I'm just saying, there's a reason Resident Evil 4 Remake is one of my favorite games in the entire series, easily in the top 3. Sadler was a perfect villain for the game, and his presence looming over the entire playthrough just added to the mystery of this character. An awesome villain, but sadly just missed out on the top 5. William Birkin is easily one of the most misrepresented villains in the series. I hear so often about how sad Birkin is because he was just a father that wanted to save himself. No, this guy was a serious jackass who was very, very evil. Birkin was always smart, even at a young age, and this would lead to him falling under the wing of James Marcus, one of Umbrella's founders. He was joined by Albert Wesker, who was part of that devious Project Wesker. Spencer had found a problem in his research that he asked Birkin to fix. The problem was that 10% of the population was naturally immune to the T-virus, so Birkin was set with making that 10% 0%. Birkin figured out the problem by creating the Hunter, a creature created through splicing the T-virus and reptilian DNA. Birkin would research with his partner, Annette, and the two would fall in love and eventually get married and have a kid named Sherry. However, they were workaholic parents and didn't really care about their kid and just worried about their own work. Birkin was also working on the Tyrant Project, and by 1988, research had stalled on the project, with most of the Tyrants having severe brain issues. However, Birkin would change this by creating a T-virus strain that lowered the brain damage. Birkin would gain access to Marcus's work, and in 1988, Spencer would order the assassination of James Marcus, and Birkin would gloat in the face of the dying Marcus about taking his research. Birkin would also begin a little project known as the G-Virus, which will definitely not be relevant at all in a minute. The giant underground facility Nest would be completed not long after that, and it was Umbrella's top-secret laboratory mainly focused on the G-Virus. Finally, 1998 rolled around, and a T-Virus breakout in the Arklay Mountains put Birkin on edge. He would go so far to talk to Wesker about possibly leaving Umbrella. The two hatched a plan for Wesker to sell the G-Virus to other companies, which would be devastating for Umbrella. However, this didn't go unnoticed, and Spencer would order the assassination of Birkin, and he was confronted by Hunk and Alpha Team. Birkin would be shot, and Hunk took the G-Virus samples. However, Birkin injected himself with one in the hopes that it saved him. It did not, and Birkin would mutate into a grotesque creature. After attacking and killing most of Alpha Team, Birkin would slowly lose his sanity as the G-Virus took control and continued to mutate. This is where Resident Evil 2 takes place, and in the Leon section, we first meet Birkin in the underground area below the RPD, where we have a boss fight with him, and eventually Leon does enough damage to make Birkin fall off one of the guardrails. Sticking with Leon here, he meets Birkin again in the sewers, where we have to dodge Birkin's attacks before fighting him on a platform where we hit him with a storage box being moved by a crane, and he falls below again. We can see that Birkin has mutated more, with another head poking out and Birkin's original head shrinking into the mutated body. And Leon fights Birkin one more time in Nest, where an even more mutated Birkin, now with multiple giant claws, have a last showdown with Leon. Leon would once again be too much for Birkin, and he would kill Birkin for good, at least in the Leon part of the game. Claire's section is a little bit different, as she also fights Birkin underneath the RPD, but they also meet as Birkin kills Mr. X, who had been chasing Claire and Sherry, and they plummet down into the sewers below. The two would meet again in the sewers and Nest, same as the Leon campaign. But instead of a final fight with Mr. X, Claire has a final fight with Birkin at the train station, and Claire would blast Birkin with a machine gun until he once again supposedly dies. However, in the second playthrough of the game, Birkin would mutate one final time and attack Leon, Claire, and Sherry in the train as a giant goop monster. Birkin would finally meet his end in the exploding train car, and the three make it out of Raccoon City alive. I hate when I hear Birkin called a sympathetic villain. No, he was not. He was a horrible person even before he transformed. This was a truly evil guy, and that just adds to the appeal of Birkin, as he was just always evil, and he does not have a sympathetic story, which makes him a better villain in my opinion. Victor Gideon is a character that just represents failure. Every single thing Victor attempts or tries to replicate fails. Also, make sure to watch TheRadBrad's video on Gideon as he goes super in-depth and breaks down Victor as a villain. This video is fantastic. Link will be in the description. Gideon worked at Umbrella and was one of the researchers working on the T-Virus project prior to the events of 1998. Gideon would become obsessed with his supposed master, Oswell Spencer, and this will pop up throughout his story, as Gideon can't really think for himself, and he just follows what he thinks Spencer would have wanted, although even this would backfire on him. Gideon was not a high-ranking member and didn't even work at the Ark Complex, meaning that he most likely never met Spencer, or at least had a conversation with him. In the aftermath of the Raccoon City incident, Gideon was supposed to testify in front of Congress in the Raccoon Files, but he never appeared and could not be tracked down. In 2004, Gideon would purchase the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center, where he would conduct experiments of his own. The Connections began to seize much of Umbrella's assets, including Ark, and they would reach out to Victor. Gideon would eventually learn of memory transfusion through blood, and resigned himself to trying to bring back Spencer through memory transfusion. Gideon also learned of Elpis, a very secretive viral agent. Gideon believed that Elpis was Spencer's final project, and that it must be very important and very dangerous. Gideon believed Elpis was a strain of T-Virus, and believed Spencer would want him to release it to the world and infect everybody. Gideon learned that Spencer adopted a child, being Grace, who was given the journalist Alyssa Ashcroft. Gideon believed that Grace was the key to bringing back Spencer, and believed she had the properties to successfully restore his memories. Gideon would also begin working with the Connections, and for more than 2 decades would work alongside Zeno, a high-ranking Connections member, and possibly a clone of Albert Wesker. They would abduct many victims and keep them underneath the care center and harvest their blood, goddamn, to continue their experiments. Many child clones of Grace's incomplete medical records experts were brought to ARC, and most would die from the exposure to the T-virus. In 2018, things would change with Gideon ordering an assassination on Alyssa Ashcroft with the hope of capturing Grace. Gideon sent a T-virus-riddled assassin to take out Alyssa, and he was successful by stabbing her, but the assassin would die from gun wounds before he was able to capture Grace. Just before the events of Requiem, Gideon learned of Raccoon City Syndrome, which plagued people who had survived the events of 1998. Gideon would also implant a nemesis parasite into himself, making him taller and more powerful. It also made his skin look cracked and disgusting. He would also bring in 2 new clones in Emily and Marie, and would begin experimenting upon them. He would inject the 2 with a strain of T-virus, and Marie would mutate into the Girl, a gigantic creature which lived underground and in the ceilings of the care center. Gideon learned that Grace now worked for the FBI, and hatched a scheme to have her captured. Gideon believed Grace to be a successful clone with some of Spencer's memories inside of her. Gideon would make his move when Grace went to the Renwood Hotel and injected one of the guards with a strain of T-virus. Grace would meet this guard and barely survive him before escaping into the emergency exit and coming face to face with Gideon. Gideon knocks her unconscious, and this is where we see the carelessness of Victor Gideon. We see that Gideon is extremely careless, as that guard could have easily killed Grace, and he would never have the information he needed. This will also be seen later in the game. Outside, Gideon would catch the attention of bystanders and one Leon Kennedy, who noticed this giant dude holding a girl on his shoulder. Gideon would shoot passers-by with a strain of T-virus as a distraction and escape in the chaos. We then reach the Chronic Care Center, where Gideon starts his testing of Grace. Gideon would be careless again and leave Grace in the room, and she would be attacked by the girl and just narrowly escape being saved by Leon. Gideon would close a gate on Leon and Grace and almost immediately knock out Leon and take him to the attic to interrogate him. While Leon was unconscious, Gideon would stumble upon Grace after looking for Anthony Richardson, one of the care center's researchers. Gideon would again be careless, and Grace would run out the door and hide, and Gideon would return to Leon. Leon would not talk, as Gideon would become very touchy with Leon, a lot like a lot of horror villains. Leon would escape because of course, and Gideon would flee. Grace would see Gideon again at his underground blood facility, where she spies on him talking to Zeno on the phone, before doing this.
I've done it. I've done it.
He would enact this self-destruct mode on the facility, and Grace just managed to escape before the facility's destruction. After Emily's transformation and Leon killing her, or I guess supposedly killing her, Grace would leave Leon, blaming herself for Emily's death, and this is where she meets Victor, who opens the hangar door to reveal Zeno. It's from this point through practically the rest of the game that Gideon takes a back seat in the story. The 3 get on a helicopter, and Gideon is the one to fly it. Zeno also orders Victor to destroy Leon once and for all, so Victor hops on a motorcycle and he and Leon have a fantastic and very goofy fight, with Victor first setting some mutant wolf things for having a showdown with Leon. Leon would gash Victor's gas tank and would blow it up with a couple well-placed shots, and that would seemingly be the end of Gideon. Victor does not appear again until the very end of the game, right after Zeno injected himself with Elpis and became just a regular guy again. After realizing Elpis was an antiviral, Gideon would proclaim his master a genius, and that he would be the one to carry his hope of anarchy to light. He would then disrespect Zeno.
You are nothing but an imitation.
Gideon would then take an Elpis sample before entering the wrong password and bringing down the facility and the rest of the antivirals. Leon and Gideon would have a final face-off, with Gideon harnessing some electrical power to aid him. But once again, it's Leon goddamn Kennedy, and he would finally make Victor fall off one of the platforms, but that's not all, as Victor comes back as a gigantic, actually don't know what that is. He becomes a massive flesh with no apparent head and just a lot of hearts. The fight itself isn't too difficult, and Leon would finally kill Victor by shooting him in the heart with the Requiem.
This time, you ain't getting back up.
Victor is just a failure, plain and simple. His motivations also change in a heartbeat when he immediately decides to carry Spencer's idea of destroying all virus-based weapons, when he was literally just wanting to release Elpis as a virus to the world. Gideon is just a pathetic loser, trying to replicate the work of greater and more accomplished men. Victor Gideon's story is one of just complete incompetence and failure, and that is what makes him such an interesting and compelling villain to me. I know some of you guys would have Nemesis as number 2 or 1, but let's slow it down for a second. Nemesis is still easily one of the best survival horror villains, but I think there's one that's similar to Nemesis that I think is just a little bit better. But let's talk about the vastly superior Nemesis, who is probably the only villain that got worse after the remake. Umbrella's goal in the 80s and 90s was to create a bioweapon that they could sell to the US Army. However, there was a flaw in the T-Virus project that most of the hosts had very limited intelligence. It wasn't until William Birkin's Hunter project that the projects gained near human-level intelligence. Umbrella set up the Tyrant project in 1988, as well as the Nemesis project, which aimed to create a parasitic organism that could take over a BOW with the parasite's higher intelligence. In 1998, a decision was made to inject a Tyrant with the Nemesis parasite, as this would create Nemesis, a vastly stronger and smarter bioweapon. After getting word of the T-Virus outbreak in Raccoon City, Umbrella would send in multiple Tyrants and one Nemesis, with Nemesis's mission being to kill remaining STARS members Brad Vickers and Jill Valentine. Nemesis tracked the two and took out Vickers with one of its tentacles. The rest of the game is Jill trying to escape Nemesis as she runs around the ruins of Raccoon City. I absolutely love how Nemesis is first shown, as it is clear that he is an extremely dangerous threat that can execute orders and people. Unlike the garbage attempt at Nemesis, although I still do like the remake, the original doesn't morph into a giant dog for half of the story. Nemesis fights Jill on the train leaving Raccoon City, and UBCS member Mikhail Victor sacrifices himself by blowing up the train car with himself and Nemesis, injuring the bioweapon. Nemesis and Jill have a fight outside the clock tower, where Jill has to evade Nemesis's tentacles and then, well, shoot him. Nemesis is super tanky and has a bunch of health, so it takes practically everything in Jill's arsenal to bring him down. Also, periodically throughout the game, Nemesis will jump Jill, and you have to decide to either fight Nemesis and use a lot of resources, but if you defeat him, you get an upgrade to your weapon, or a lot of resources, or you can just run away from Nemesis and not use those precious resources. Nemesis, however, in the clock tower fight, infects Jill with one of his tentacles. This is another one of those villains that doesn't need a background to be good. It's purely about the gameplay, and Nemesis is just fantastic. Jill shoots some acid tanks that severely injure Nemesis and actually kills the Tyrant's body. However, the parasite survived and mutated into a gigantic blob of flesh creature, very similar to Gideon. Jill finally kills it using electric ray gun, which is just so Resident Evil. I love Nemesis, and although its story isn't nearly as complex as Gideon's or Miranda's, it's still such a fantastic character and an amazing villain, and it is so sad how dirty they did the remake version. Also, easily one of the scariest villains in the game, and similar to Jack Baker, being that they are both faster than the player, meaning you can't just run away from him. Now, this one's gonna get some hate because I know a lot of you would take Nemesis over Mr. X, but I disagree. I just love Mr. X, man, and every time I hear RE2, I always get terrified when I hear that guy's footsteps. I think the horror feel of Mr. X is infinitely more terrifying than getting chased by Nemesis, but that's just my opinion. Mr. X was one of the Tyrants created in the Tyrant Project, and was also sent to Raccoon City during the T-Virus outbreak. He was dropped at the Raccoon City Police Department to kill any survivors seeking refuge. In the first story of Leon and Claire, they first meet Mr. X the same way, with Mr. X moving aside a helicopter and then chasing the player. In the second campaign, we first see Mr. X on a computer. But after our first encounter with him, Mr. X chases the player throughout the police department. If you run around or shoot, Mr. X will be attracted to your location and arrive shortly. You will have to walk and somehow avoid lickers and the stupid zombie grabs to not be heard. You can also hear Mr. X as he traipses around the department with his huge feet, as you can hear him if he's near you or directly above you. Mr. X wears a trench coat and top hat to apparently blend in with regular civilians. Our most dapper stalker tracks us throughout the RPD until we get underground, and this is where the Claire and Leon stories go separate ways. In the Claire storyline, after saving Sherry, we get chased by Mr. X, but he is swiftly killed by William Birkin by getting a claw right to his chest. However, he becomes a much more prevalent villain in Leon's campaign, as he shows up a fair few times. After getting to the parking garage and retrieving the keycard, Leon is jumped by Mr. X, who runs through a wall. However, Leon's saved when Ada drives the truck right into him and stops the Tyrant for the moment. Mr. X doesn't appear until we reach the Nest facility, where he attacks us in the greenhouse area area after he retrieved the level 3 keycard. Leon has one final showdown with the Tyrant where Mr. X gets blown up in a fire, but he's not quite dead yet as he and Leon enter their fight on a platform with a mutated Mr. X, now without a trench coat, which exposes his vulnerable heart, which the trench coat protected. Leon fights Mr. X on the platform, making sure to dodge his grabs and his insta-kill move. Finally, after Ada somehow survives her fall, she throws a rocket launcher to Leon and he puts Mr. X down for good by blowing him up. Once again, very similar to Nemesis and the complete opposite of the villain at the top of the list. Mr. X doesn't have much backstory, but that doesn't matter at all. Absolutely love Mr. X, and there is nothing better to spike your blood pressure and give you an early aneurysm when you see that dude open the door to the room you're in. Finally, we're at the top of the list, and it's pretty obvious who it is. Finally, we reach the very tippy top of the list, and to no one's surprise, it's Mr. 7 Minutes. Albert Wesker is one of the reasons that Resident Evil got as big as it currently is, as his huge influence and being the main villain of the entire story make him such a fantastic villain. First person ever to sound badass with a British accent, by the way. Wesker was taken at a young age by Oswell E. Spencer, and he was raised by the Spencer Foundation. Albert was chosen for Project Wesker, which sought to create a group of superhumans. The large group of children chosen were brainwashed into having Spencer's ideologies and values so that they couldn't abandon Umbrella. Before their experiment, the group was given the ability to enter universities to boost their knowledge, and Albert would choose biotechnology. Wesker was hired by Umbrella Pharmaceuticals in 1977, and he was given a place at the Umbrella Executive Training School, where he would gain a friendly rival in one William Birkin. James Marcus, one of Umbrella's founders, took an interest in Albert and William, but the training school would be closed that year, and the two students were given jobs at the Arclay Laboratory for their stealing of some of Marcus's work. Wesker and Birkin almost immediately began work on the T-Virus project. They were successful and were able to splice the Ebola virus to create the T-Virus. In 1988, Spencer ordered the assassination of James Marcus, and Wesker and Birkin would accompany the soldiers and literally laugh in the face of Marcus, before dumping him and his queen Leech in the sewers below. Wesker and Birkin would begin work on a little project called the Tyrant. The two's work with the Nemesis parasite on Lisa Trevor would lead to them discovering the G-Virus, and Birkin would quickly become obsessed. In the 90s, Wesker would join the US Army and would feed information to Umbrella about the government. While in the military and on a deployment in Edonia, Wesker would have a child being Jake Muller, who Wesker never met. Wesker was assigned to the Special Tactics and Rescue Services, or STARS. Wesker would work with STARS members Jill Valentine, Chris Redfield, Barry Burton, Joseph Frost, and Brad Vickers, and would gain their trust and become their captain. In 1998, Wesker and Birkin would evacuate a Tyrant and had to limit the spread of the information. Finally, we reach the events of the Resident Evil games, as some zombie dogs, or Cerberus, escaped into the Arclay Mountains and began killing hikers, so STARS and other groups would be sent to see what all of the deaths were from. During the STARS preparations, Birkin and Wesker met and made preparations to blow up the Umbrella training facility. Wesker would become even more certain that leaving Umbrella was the right thing, and Birkin and Wesker made plans to leave Umbrella once and for all. Wesker was also given a mutant strain of the T-Virus, which would enhance his body's strength and speed without the risk of mutating. On the STARS mission, Jill, Chris, and Wesker would escape a pack of zombie dogs and seek refuge in the Spencer Mansion, where Wesker already had secret orders from Umbrella. Wesker would also force Barry Burton into helping him by threatening Barry's family. Wesker would kill Captain Marini after discovering that he had found some incriminating evidence of Umbrella's doing. Wesker made preparations to release the facility's Tyrant, and he would be cornered by his comrades before confessing to working with Umbrella and releasing the Tyrant. However, the Tyrant would kill Wesker instead of following his orders, except Wesker wasn't dead. With his now superior healing abilities, he simply healed the wound and survived the incident, and would leave Umbrella for good. Wesker would keep himself staying alive a secret and would work in the shadows. He would contact Birkin, and the two made plans to sell the G-Virus to rival companies. However, Spencer would find out and order the assassination of Birkin, although he still didn't know about Wesker. Wesker would then pay mercenary Ada Wong into retrieving a G-Virus sample, and she would escape with the sample on a helicopter out of Raccoon City before its destruction. After obtaining the G-Virus, Wesker would lead a HCF raid on Rockford Island, the island housing the Ashfords, as Wesker searched for the T. Veronica virus. The HFC would send BOWs and bomb Rockford Island, as well as releasing the T-virus, but Wesker left the island via submarine when discovering that Alexia was at an Umbrella facility in Antarctica. Wesker would reach Alexia and demand that she hand over the T-Veronica virus, except she refused, and Wesker would do this. Wesker found Chris and Claire in Antarctica and tried taking the opportunity to kill them, but would fail. Wesker would once again supposedly die in the facility's evaporation, but Wesker once again managed to escape and operate from the shadows. In 2003, Wesker sought vengeance upon Umbrella and headed for one of their Russian facilities and fought Sergei Vladimir and eventually defeated him and released private information on Umbrella, which would bankrupt and ruin the company. After Umbrella Chronicles, Wesker would begin plans for world domination like every villain does and partnered with the company Tricell and geneticist Excella Gion. Excella would quickly rise as CEO with the help of Wesker, and they set up in Africa to discover the properties of the progenitor virus. This is where the events of Resident Evil 4 take place, when Wesker once again hired Ada Wong, this time to obtain a dominant species of Las Plagas for him. Ada would obtain the parasite, but after learning of Wesker's plans, Ada would abandon Wesker. This would not matter, as Albert would recover the Plaga-riddled body of Jack Krauser and have everything he needed to begin work on a world-ending project. By 2006, Wesker had gained a trade partner in bioweapons dealer Ricardo Irving. At that time, a giant facility in Africa at the location of the progenitor virus would be set up. Wesker would find a hiding Oswald Spencer at that time and would confront him and finally learn the truth behind Project Wesker. Albert would look at Spencer as a failure and a wannabe god and punched him straight through the chest, ending the billionaire's life. He was interrupted by Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, who had come to arrest Spencer. Wesker would fight the two before getting thrown out of a window alongside Jill, and Wesker would capture Jill and use her for his upcoming projects. Wesker began the Ouroboros project not long after that, with the goal of destroying the world order and creating a race of superhumans. Wesker would also have a mind control device planted on Jill, and would use her to help him with Chris. In 2009, Wesker would obtain a stealth bomber, and this would be the final piece of the puzzle Wesker needed to enact his ideas. Also in 2009, BSAA members Chris Redfield, who must have been taking roids, and Sheva Alomar, with Chris looking for Jill. Wesker and Jill would confront Chris and Sheva, and Wesker would drop one of the coldest lines in the series.
7 minutes. 7 minutes is all I can spare to play with you.
Wesker leaves the other three to have fun, and Chris and Sheva manage to get the mind control device off of Jill. Wesker and Excella would board the ship holding the stealth bomber, and Chris and Sheva were right behind. Wesker would inject Sheva with Ouroboros to see if she had the 1 in 100 chance to survive it. She did not. After fighting off the giant, blob, Chris and Sheva fight Wesker, but this time with rocket launchers. Wesker would escape to his stealth bomber, but Chris and Sheva stayed right on his heels, and this is where Wesker reveals his master plan.
Ouroboros will be released into the atmosphere, ensuring complete global saturation.
Chris would manage to stop the bomber, and the three would crash land in an active volcano. Wesker would merge with Ouroboros and, of course, be successful, as he would mutate and have tentacles all over his body. The three would have one final fight, as Wesker's heart switches from his chest to his back, which makes no sense at all, but after what felt like an eternity, they finally do enough damage to damage Wesker severely, where he would be thrown into the volcano. However, once again, he's not dead, and would survive the volcano and begin attacking a helicopter, which Chris and Sheva managed to get on. Finally, Wesker is defeated with the mother of all killers, the rocket launcher, baby. Finally, Wesker is gone, and I've seen people who would love Wesker to return to the franchise, and I don't agree. Wesker had a perfect arc, with his final goal of world domination going haywire. Wesker is easily the best villain in the franchise. I mean, there is no one that comes close, and even though he hasn't been in a new game in 17 years, Wesker is still a fan favorite. And with the upcoming Code Veronica, 0, and 5 remakes coming out within the next decade, we still have some Wesker left to enjoy. So enjoy it before it's truly over. So there we go. That was 46 Resident Evil villains, and this is probably at around 2 hours in the video. I'm not entirely sure. If you disagree with my opinions, it's okay, but just remember, to be a fan of a YouTuber means you have to agree with everything they say. This video took me way too long to make, like literal weeks. Finally, these weeks of erectile dysfunction are over, and I can embrace my inevitable brain aneurysm. So please like and subscribe, and there will be more Resident Evil content on the way.
Should've worn a helmet.